Hi, Anime Realm here. This is my recap for the anime from Old Country Bumpkin to Master Swordsman. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. Beryl is the best swordsman in the world, but he doesn't know that. He's now in his 40s and runs a small dojo out in the sticks as always, far from any kind of excitement. One day, while he's out in the yard going through his daily training routine, his father looks over at him and sighs, saying he really wishes there were some grandkids running around to keep him company. It's been years since Beryl took over the family dojo. But when it comes to romance, not much has changed. He's still just as single as he was back then. Beryl tells him he's been too focused on running the dojo to think about things like settling down or starting a family. But his old man isn't letting it go. He insists Beryl should at least try, and even half-jokingly suggests he find a promising young female student to raise up as a wife. But Beryl immediately shuts that idea down for ethical reasons. This dojo has been in the family for generations, and Beryl has poured himself into it ever since he inherited it from his father. There was a time he dreamed of making a name for himself, of becoming a renowned sword master, and while his skills definitely surpass the average swordsman by a mile, he doesn't see himself as worthy of such a lofty title. Even so, he's proud of being a good teacher because many of his students have gone on to achieve great things after training under him. Later that evening, after finishing up practice for the day, Beryl sits down to eat with his parents. But his dad brings it up again: marriage, family, grandkids, the whole thing. He even tries to get his wife friend to put some pressure on Beryl, but she takes a gentler approach. She says these things take time and shouldn't be rushed, although she does still expect to see a grandchild eventually. Beryl almost chokes on his dinner at that. It's easy to say, but not exactly realistic, because he doesn't even have a damn girlfriend, let alone a path toward kids, and it's not like some beautiful woman's just going to magically show up at the front door. Except a few seconds later, someone does knock. Beryl opens the door and is stunned to see a beautiful woman standing there. She greets him respectfully, calling him master, and once he gets a better look, he realizes she's none other than Alucia Citrus, one of his former students. He invites her inside and offers her tea while they catch up. Beryl remembers her well. She was a natural talent back then, sharp and disciplined. What he didn't expect was that she'd rise all the way to become the commander of the Royal Knight Order. Curious about the reason for her visit, Beryl asks her why she's here. Alucia explains that as Knight Commander, one of her duties is to oversee the training of new recruits. After giving it some thought, she decided to recommend Beryl as a special sword instructor. And what's more, her recommendation got approved as an official Imperial order. So she came all this way to deliver the news personally. Beryl never asked to be made an Imperial instructor, so his first instinct is to turn the offer down. But before he can say anything, his father jumps in, warning him that refusing an Imperial order might be more than just impolite. It could get him executed, so you can't just wave something like that away. Alucia quickly reassures him that it won't come to that. No one's going to kill him for saying no, but there would definitely be serious consequences, so it's probably best he just accept it. She then mentions that a carriage is already waiting to take them to the capital, and she'll go over the details of his new position tomorrow. Beryl is stunned that Alucia expects him to leave immediately, but his dad seems completely fine with it. In fact, he waves Beryl off with a grin and tells him to make the most of his time in the capital. Maybe even find himself a wife while he's at it. He even adds loudly that Alucia wouldn't be a bad choice. Embarrassed, Beryl tells his dad to cut it out, especially since it's clearly making Alucia uncomfortable. There's too big an age gap between them anyway, but Alucia kind of mumbles under her breath that she wouldn't really mind. Either way, Beryl doesn't want to stick around and find out what kind of serious consequences refusing might bring, so he agrees to go with her. While riding together in the carriage, Beryl notices something familiar. Alucia is still carrying the sword he gave her. It's the same blade he gives to every student who graduates from his dojo, a mark of completion, and clearly she's kept hers in pristine condition all these years. He's honestly touched to see she still treasures it that much, though he admits he doesn't think a sword like that is worthy of a knight commander. He tells her she could easily get a far better weapon from any decent blacksmith, but Alucia disagrees. She says the blade is perfect, and it suits her just fine. Beryl assumes she's only saying that because she still holds on to a little student loyalty, like she sees anything from her old master as more valuable than it really is. But the truth is, he considers himself nothing more than a regular swordsman. He doesn't believe someone like him is cut out to serve as a high-ranking instructor. Right then, Alusha breaks into a grin and says she's pumped that the country bumpkin swordmaster is finally making his debut in the capital. Beryl gives her a confused look, like who the hell is that supposed to be? He's not a bumpkin, and he's definitely not a swordmaster, but she insists he is. Whether he believes it or not, he's already well known in swordsmanship circles. He's trained dozens of students who later rose to fame as renowned warriors and adventurers. In the right circles, he's something of a living legend, though she does admit she's not thrilled about the nickname he's picked up along the way. Beryl chuckles at the story but doesn't buy into it because in his eyes, Alusha is probably the only person in the world who still sees him as anything close to a swordmaster. Before long, they arrive at the royal capital. Alusha drops Beryl off at a quiet inn, telling him to get some rest and that she'll swing by in the morning to pick him up. The next morning, true to her word, Alusha escorts him to the royal castle and formally introduces him to the Knight Order. Standing before the gathered recruits, she boldly announces that Beryl is so skilled, even she wouldn't stand a chance against him, and that they should consider themselves lucky to be taught by someone of his caliber. Not everyone's impressed though, because a few of the knights exchange doubtful glances, and one of them in particular doesn't hide his displeasure. Clearly not all of them believe Beryl deserves the position he's been given. Later, Beryl and Alusha walk together through the castle corridors. She congratulates him on officially becoming a special instructor, explaining that his duties won't be too demanding because he's only expected to train the recruits 3 or 4 times a month. That way, he can continue managing the dojo back home without any major disruption. Suddenly, a girl runs up to them, practically bouncing with excitement. She shouts, "Master," like she's been waiting years to see him, and turns out she kind of has. Her name's Kirani, and she used to be one of Beryl's students about 2 years back. He remembers that her goal was to join the Knight Order, so seeing her actually make it in is pretty awesome. She's still a trainee for now, meaning she's got a long way to go before she becomes a full-fledged knight. But she's just thrilled that she gets to train under Beryl again. And honestly, so is Alusha. Later that same day, Beryl returns home, expecting a quiet evening. But the moment he opens the door, he finds a familiar face waiting inside. Yet another one of his former students. It's Randrid, and this time he didn't come alone. He's brought his wife and newborn child to introduce them. Beryl is overjoyed to see that Randrid is doing well, but before he can say much, his father butts in, blunt as ever, and tells Beryl that he shouldn't bother coming back until he also has a wife and kid, just like Randrid. Speaking of him, Randrid went on to become a platinum-ranked adventurer after graduating from Beryl's dojo, a seriously impressive feat. But now that he's a father, he's decided it's time to retire and return to the village. Beryl is surprised that Randrid would give up something as big as platinum rank so easily. But then again, life as an adventurer is risky, and it's not the kind of danger you want around when you've got a family to protect. While they're catching up, Randrid casually mentions that he's planning to help out by running the dojo. Beryl confusedly asks what he means, and that's when his father drops the bomb. He's already decided that Randrid has the skills to take over as the new instructor, which means Beryl no longer needs to stay there. Basically, his father just kicked him out, despite the fact that Beryl technically owns the house. The next day, Beryl fills Alusha in on everything and tells her he's gonna need to find a place to stay in the city. The inn he crashed at last night was way too fancy for long-term living, so he's hoping to find something a little easier on the wallet. Alusha is more than willing to help him search. Half joking, she offers to let him stay at her place instead, but Beryl quickly turns the idea down, saying it wouldn't be appropriate. The disappointment on Alusha's face is obvious, but she doesn't push the matter. Trying to lighten the mood, she asks if he'd at least like to grab lunch with her. Beryl agrees, and the two start heading toward a nearby restaurant. But before they can get far, someone suddenly calls out, accusing Alusha of being shameless for walking around in public with a man, and even addressing him as master so casually. The girl clearly has some history with Alusha, and it's not a pleasant one. She looks disgusted that someone with the title of Knight Commander would be seen out and about with what looks like some random guy. Beryl, trying to avoid drama, keeps his head low and tries not to draw attention, but the girl isn't having it. She strides right up to him and pulls his mask down, insisting on seeing his face. The moment she gets a good look, her entire attitude shifts, and she calls him master too. Naturally, Beryl is confused because he doesn't recognize her at all, but she quickly reminds him that her name is Shurna. and he once saved her life and taught her how to wield a sword. It takes him a moment, but the memories begin to surface. He remembers finding a wounded girl about 20 years ago, nursing her back to health, and teaching her the basics of swordsmanship. They eventually went their separate ways, and he hasn't seen her in over a decade. But he's genuinely surprised to learn she's become a black rank adventurer. Shurna apologizes for not visiting him all these years, but she also wants to know what brings him to the capital all of a sudden. Alusha explains that Beryl has been appointed as a special instructor for the Knight's Order, and that she's been helping him look for a place to stay. However, Shurna immediately jumps in, claiming she'd be far better at finding suitable inns. After all, she's been bouncing between inns for years, so she knows her way around. Before long, the two women are arguing, bickering over who should help Beryl with house hunting. Beryl, stuck between them, still doesn't understand where all this tension between them comes from. But with their combined effort, and despite the non-stop bickering, they eventually manage to help him find a decent inn that suits his needs. Once everything is settled, Beryl thanks them both for their help. Then, with a tired sigh, he asks them to stop fighting, for his sanity if nothing else, because he's had enough yelling for one day. Out of respect for him, both women go quiet, and they walk back together without another word. Beryl stands by the window, watching the two women as they walk off in silence. City life might not be his style, and he can't exactly say he's thrilled about all the noise and commotion that comes with it. But having so many of his former students close by brings a quiet comfort. So maybe, just maybe, he won't be so out of place here after all. The following day, the Night Order's usual training session is underway. Out on the field, Vice Commander Henblitz is putting on a show, outmatching every sparring partner with ease, his swordsmanship sharp and precise, so it's clear that he's on a different level. After finishing his bout, Alusha suddenly steps forward and makes an announcement. She tells everyone there's been a change in plans, and effective immediately Beryl will now be training them more frequently, not just once a week. Starting today, he'll be taking part in their instruction, and she expects them to push themselves harder than ever. Beryl then steps forward and starts to introduce himself, saying he's glad to be working with them. But before he can even begin his first session, Henblitz approaches him directly and says he has something to address. Henblitz explains that to be appointed as a special instructor for the Night Order, one must demonstrate a certain level of strength. So as part of protocol, and with no disrespect intended, he is officially challenging Beryl to a duel. It's not personal. He simply wants to confirm that Beryl is truly qualified for the position, and as the Vice Commander, he has the authority to make such a request. And Alusha unsurprisingly grants her approval without hesitation. Beryl lets out a silent sigh because he really wishes she'd stop signing him up for things without asking first. But Henblitz issued the challenge, and now he has no choice but to accept it. Henblitz is convinced that the only reason Beryl's even here is because of Alusha's personal bias, that she's simply holding on to admiration for the man who trained her as a child. But just because he was her old instructor doesn't automatically make him fit for this role. Henblitz plans to prove that right now by defeating him in front of everyone. Strangely enough, Beryl agrees with most of what Henblitz is saying. He's never believed himself to be good enough for a title like Special Instructor. But if he loses here, it'll reflect poorly on Alusha, who stuck her neck out to recommend him. So for her sake, he decides he'll give this fight everything he's got. The duel then begins with Henblitz launching himself forward in a burst of speed, closing the gap between them in an instant. Beryl raises his blade, calmly parrying the barrage of strikes coming his way. He's genuinely impressed because Henblitz is incredibly fast, and the force behind each blow is nothing short of brutal. Still, Beryl knows that if he times it just right, if he redirects a single strike at the perfect angle, he can create an opening. And that's exactly what happens. With one clean deflection, he catches Henblitz off balance and slips in close, his blade poised for a decisive strike. Henblitz freezes because if this were a real fight, that move would have meant death, so that's 1 point to Beryl. They then return to their starting stances, and Henblitz comes in again, even faster than before. Beryl is still stunned by Henblitz's sheer physical strength, but at the same time, every move is easy to read. He blocks and redirects them with practiced ease. Realizing that Beryl isn't going to go down that easily, Henblitz decides to stop holding back. He unleashes his signature technique, the Roaring Blade, a spinning high-speed attack packed with so much power it can't be blocked or parried by normal means. It's a move designed to end fights, but just as the blade cuts through the air, Beryl vanishes. And in the blink of an eye, he reappears behind Henblitz, his sword calmly resting at the man's neck. So it's over, and Beryl wins. Henblitz doesn't even look upset. He's stunned, yes, but more in awe than anything. He admits defeat with humility and offers a sincere apology for doubting Beryl earlier. Later that day, Henblitz hosts a small welcome party to officially celebrate Beryl's arrival as the knight's new instructor. But even now, he can't let go of the question that's been eating at him: how did Beryl counter that spinning move? Beryl, with his usual modesty, explains that he simply moved with Henblitz's rotation, using the motion itself to slip behind him. It's a lot easier said than done though, because executing something like that takes incredible timing, instinct, and experience. Henblitz laughs and amazed at how effortlessly Beryl makes it sound. Regardless, he's genuinely excited to train under him, and so are the rest of the recruits. It's been about a week since Beryl started working as an instructor, and while two knights are busy sparring on the training grounds, he strolls over to give them a quick pointer. He's been observing their movements for a while now. Their swordplay is solid, but Beryl tells them they need to fix their spacing. He demonstrates how if you're too focused on tracking your opponent's blade, they can close the gap before you even notice. It might not seem like a big deal, but in an actual duel, even half a step can decide the outcome. Beryl figured he was just handing out some basic tips, but from the way everyone is staring at him like he just dropped divine wisdom, you'd think he reinvented swordsmanship. Ever since that duel with Henblitz, the knights have been hanging on his every word like it's scripture. Honestly, Beryl can't complain because it's definitely made training smoother. After the session ends, Beryl takes a seat to cool off, and Henblitz walks over and hands him a towel to dry off. A little while later, Kearney strolls up and asks if Beryl's got anything going on after this. He wasn't really planning on doing much, and that's all she needs to hear before asking if she can give him a little tour of the city. Beryl thinks about it and realizes he hasn't really seen much of Baltrain yet, so he agrees. Kearney practically lights up with excitement and darts off to change into something more casual. Elsewhere, Alusha is neck-deep in meetings with royal officials, delivering an update on the Knight Order, especially concerning their newly appointed special instructor. She assures them that Beryl has already gone above and beyond expectations. With nothing more to cover, the meeting wraps up. Before taking this role, people warned her, if you want to keep honing your sword skills, don't become knight captain. The bureaucracy alone will drag you down. But she didn't take this position for herself. She took it because it was the only way to bring Beryl here to the capital. Years ago, when Alusha was still a little girl, her parents brought her to Beryl's dojo to learn self-defense. And from the very first moment she met him, she could tell he was a good man. And once she joined the dojo, Beryl had her practicing sword swings, hopping from stump to improve her footwork, and working on her strength with simple exercises. His methods might have been unusual, sure, but under his guidance, wielding a blade started to feel second nature. One day, Beryl asked Alusha if she wanted to spar with him, and she instantly agreed, excited to show off everything she'd learned. But the moment their mock battle started, she realized she couldn't find a damn single opening in his stance. Growing up under Beryl's guidance, Alusha had assumed that all sword instructors were as skilled as he was. But that illusion shattered one day during a group trip to a dojo-wide mock battle against another school. Her opponent in that match was the definition of sloppy. He left his guard wide open and charged in with the strategy of a 5-year-old. No patience, no control, and Alusha absolutely wiped the floor with him. So the match was over before it even started. After the event, Beryl and the group were walking back to their dojo, and he seemed pleased that his students got to test themselves against different styles. Along the way, Alusha asked if their dojo was just better than the others because their dojo won every battle. Even Beryl himself won against their master. But Beryl didn't like thinking about it in terms of who's better. Sure, they won today, but the real takeaway wasn't about victory. It was about what they learned from the experience. Alusha got the message. But then she suddenly noticed that her hairpin was missing. She must have dropped it back at the other dojo, and it meant a lot to her, so she told Beryl she'd go back to find it. By the time she returned to the rival dojo, she started searching around for it, only to see that the guy she beat earlier had picked it up. For a second, it looked like he might just hand it over and act like a decent human being. But of course, that would be too easy, so instead he chucked the pin into the dojo behind him, and told Alusha she'd have to fight all of them if she wanted it back. He may have lost earlier, but with backup, he was sure he could win this time. Now, judging by how bad their sword skills were before, Alusha probably could have taken them all down on her own. But she knew Beryl wouldn't want her using her training to beat people senseless out of pride, so she stood her ground and braced herself for the hit, ready to take it rather than fight back. But before the guy's swing could land, Beryl stepped between them and took the blow himself. The strike didn't hurt him much, but he still winced a little. Looking straight at the group of boys, he calmly asked if this was really the kind of swordsman they wanted to be. The damn fool still doesn't get how messed up his actions are, so he winds up and tries to smack Beryl on the head this time. But Beryl effortlessly ducks under the swing, and in one quick move, knocks the sword right out of his hands. Before anyone can blink, Beryl is already parrying blows from the rest of the guy's friends, keeping them at bay with clean, controlled strikes. But before things can spiral any further, the head of the dojo rushes in. He heard the commotion and got there as fast as he could, and he's clearly ashamed of what he's walked into. With a heavy heart, he kneels down and offers a sincere apology to Beryl, swearing that something like this will never happen again under his roof. On the walk back, Beryl and Alusha walk side by side, and he explains that he had a bad feeling the moment she went back for her hairpin, so he followed her just in case. Alusha feels awful that Beryl ended up getting hit because of her, but he reassures her it wasn't anything serious. Besides, she didn't do anything wrong, so there's no reason for her to blame herself. If anything, he blames himself for letting his student walk into a place that could have been dangerous without supervision. Years pass, and Alusha is now sparring with Beryl again. His technique hasn't lost an ounce of sharpness, but this time as he swings, Alusha is actually able to keep up. And for the first time ever, she lands a clean point on him. Beryl is genuinely impressed with how far she's come, so he tells her that she's ready. It's time for her to graduate from the dojo, and with pride, he presents her with her ceremonial graduation sword. By this point, Alusha had come to understand that Beryl had no idea just how insanely talented he really was. She didn't want to leave the dojo because there was still so much she could learn from him. But she also didn't want to push back and make things complicated for him either. So instead of arguing, she made a promise to herself. She would prove to the world that Beryl's teaching stood above all others. That's why she joined the Knight's Order and took the entrance exam. And just as she had predicted, when the entrance exam finally came around, none of the other applicants stood a chance against the training Alusha received from Beryl. Even the proctors struggled to keep up with her, so if they couldn't handle her, they definitely wouldn't have lasted 2 seconds against Beryl. His reflexes were unreal, and his ability to read people mid-fight was on a completely different level. To Alusha, there was no question in her mind. Beryl was the strongest swordsman alive, but the man himself had no clue how skilled he truly was. And knowing him, he'd probably be perfectly content staying some nameless swordmaster living a quiet life in the countryside. Alusha, however, refused to let that happen. So a bit by bit, she climbed her way up through the Knight's Order, gaining rank and influence, all with one goal in mind, giving Beryl the recognition he deserved. By the time she had finally earned the title of Knight Commander, it had already been a full decade since she left Beryl's dojo, and in that time, he somehow became even more impressive than she remembered. A part of her still feels a little guilty about appointing him as a special instructor without asking his permission first. But really, it was the only way to get him to leave that tiny village and give the world a chance to witness his greatness. Back at the training grounds, Alusha heads over to check in with Henblitz and asks how the training went with Beryl today. Henblitz tells her it was fantastic because everyone learned something valuable from his lessons. Alusha then looks around, but she doesn't see Beryl anywhere, so she asks if he already went home. That's when Henblitz mentions that Kiruni had asked him to walk around town with her. As soon as she hears that, Alusha feels a little sting of jealousy. After all, Kiruni basically asked Beryl out on a date, and now she wishes she'd thought of it first. Meanwhile, Kiruni is showing Beryl around the city, happily pointing out the popular spots and hidden gems along the way. Beryl is honestly blown away because compared to the quiet life in his village, this place is practically bursting with energy. Though he does find it a little odd that she brought him to the Western District, since he thought the main attractions like the Church Palace were all in the Northern District. Kiruni admits he's right about that, but once you've lived here long enough, those places kind of lose their charm. You see them so often, they stop feeling special. Still, Beryl was hoping to check them out because that was actually something he had been looking forward to. As they continue strolling through the market, Beryl suddenly hears someone calling out to him. He turns toward the voice and spots a young woman approaching. She's cheerfully calling him master, which means she must have trained under him at some point. But for the life of him, Beryl can't figure out who she is. The girl seems pretty familiar with Kirani too, but that doesn't help much either. Clearly disappointed that her teacher doesn't recognize her, the girl gestures to the sword at her side as a hint and says she's one of his graduates. Beryl thinks for a moment, then it finally clicks. Her name is Faisal, and she used to train at the dojo alongside Kirani, but that was years ago. Back then, she looked completely different, which is probably why it took him a second to place her. It's been 5 years since he last saw her after all, so of course she's changed. But from the looks of it, she's done really well for herself because she's currently one of the top officers in the capital's magic corps. Beryl is genuinely happy to hear that she's thriving. But he's also a little surprised because he doesn't remember teaching her anything about magic, so this career choice catches him off guard. Kirani then asks Faisal if she's out shopping, and Faisal explains that she came to pick up some magic accessories. That term's unfamiliar to Beryl, so Faisal picks up one of the items and explains that it's a tool that lets just about anyone use magic. Of course, she doesn't need them herself because she's more than capable of casting magic on her own. Beryl is pretty shocked to learn that. He knew Faisal was good, but he didn't expect her to be this strong. Then again, she did say she's with the magic corps, so it adds up. Just then, a screen cuts through the street. A woman nearby yells that someone's stolen her purse. Beryl instinctively prepares to give chase, but before he can move, Faisal steps forward and says she's got it covered. She draws her sword, channels magic into it, and sends a burst of energy flying toward the thief. In a flash, the magic wraps around the guy's legs, knocking him flat onto the street. Before he can scramble back to his feet, Kirani swoops in and restrains him with ease. Beryl watches the whole thing unfold, impressed by how smoothly the two handled it, especially Faisal because her sword magic is unlike anything he's ever seen before. Faisal then explains that she wraps her blade in magic whenever she fights, and Beryl's sword training actually made it easier for her to tailor her spellcasting for close combat. She's genuinely thankful for everything he taught her, and Beryl in turn is glad to see one of his students still making good use of the fundamentals he drilled into them. The next day, Beryl wakes up very early and heads out for a walk around the city, like it's Ashton Hall morning routine. As he's taking in the sights, he hears someone calling out his name. He turns to look and sees a small girl standing a few feet away. Thinking she's a lost child, he bends down a bit and gently asks if she needs help finding her parents. That's when she gets loud and snaps at him for treating her like a damn kid. According to her, she's actually the leader of the entire magic corps. Beryl assumes she's just playing a fantasy game, so he doesn't buy it. The girl is visibly annoyed that he won't take her seriously, so she holds up a finger and casually conjures a giant fireball to prove her point. At that moment, Beryl starts to believe she's telling the truth because no kid should be able to pull off something like that. She scowls at him again and tells him to stop calling her a kid. Her name is Lucy, and while she may look tiny, she insists she's a full-grown adult. Well, maybe grown is a bit of a stretch, but she insists she's much older than Beryl, and she won't tolerate being treated like a kid. Apparently, Faisal had told Lucy all about him and hyped him up like some sort of sword legend, so Lucy came out to meet him in person. She's impressed that Faisal turned out to be such a badass swordswoman and figures Beryl must be a top-tier teacher. But Beryl tries to downplay it, saying that Faisal's progress is her own doing, and he only helped her get started. Out of politeness, Beryl keeps walking with Lucy, but she eventually guides him toward a wide, open plaza, and any seasoned adventurer knows what's about to happen. Lucy tells him she trains her magic every single day, constantly trying to improve, but she doesn't have many people she can spar with. That's why, now that she's met the so-called sword legend in person, she wants to test herself against him. Before Beryl can even say no, Lucy hurls a fire blast straight at him, forcing him to leap backward to avoid getting roasted. He really didn't want to fight this early in the morning, but by the look in Lucy's eyes, it's clear she won't back off until she gets the duel she came here for. With no other choice, Beryl draws his sword and gets ready to face her head-on. Lucy then blasted a damn giant fireball straight at him, making Beryl dive out of the way and start dashing across the battleground, weaving around every blazing shot she threw at him. The fireballs kept coming down like a storm, but Beryl slipped past or deflected each one without breaking a sweat. Seeing her current tactics weren't enough, Lucy switched gears and conjured 3 giant ice balls, sending them hurtling toward Beryl. Despite their enormous size, Beryl easily sliced each one cleanly in half with a single swift stroke of his sword. Witnessing Beryl's incredible swordsmanship firsthand, Lucy became even more invested in their duel. Beryl, however, wanted to wrap things up quickly, so he charged toward her, careful not to cause real harm, planning to use the hilt of his sword to simply knock her unconscious. But just as he came within striking range, Lucy engulfed herself in intense flames, forcing Beryl to immediately jump back. For a brief moment, Lucy had genuinely feared she might lose if she allowed him to close the distance. Realizing how tough it was to counter magic attacks using just swordsmanship, Beryl wished he could use magic too. Lucy, however, was nowhere near finished. She summoned even more fireballs, this time directing them behind Beryl, forcing him to retreat and dash around the field again. Lucy chuckled at the sight, amused by Beryl's seemingly directionless running. Since this was his first battle against a wizard, he truly had no prepared strategy. Eventually, the barrage of fireballs subsided, giving Beryl a moment to catch his breath. Just when he thought it was safe, Lucy dropped a massive ice ball from above, aiming directly at him. Beryl spotted it just in time, quickly parrying it back toward Lucy. Without hesitation, she shattered it easily with another burst of flame. But the collision created a dense mist that obstructed her vision. Seeing an opportunity, Beryl dashed forward through the mist to land a decisive strike, only for Lucy to unleash lightning magic at the last moment, knocking him backward. Despite his efforts, Beryl had yet to land a single solid blow, but neither had Lucy succeeded in hitting him, leaving her frustrated by their stalemate. Determined to end the battle quickly, Lucy decided it was finally time to use her trump card. Noticing her pause momentarily, Beryl believed he finally had an opening. But he abruptly halted his advance when he saw Lucy summon what appeared to be a black hole. He wasn't entirely sure what would happen if he approached it, but instinct told him it was dangerous, so he stood his ground and waited cautiously. However, after a tense moment, Lucy sighed and dispelled the spell completely. Seeing Beryl remain perfectly composed even when faced with such powerful magic made her realize continuing was pointless. Admitting she'd taken things too far, Lucy apologized sincerely and told him they could call the fight for the day. Beryl felt immensely relieved now that his duel with Lucy was finally over. It had been nerve-wracking to face someone as formidable as her. Curiosity soon got the better of him though, and he asked Lucy what would have happened if she'd actually unleashed that last spell. Lucy casually explained that in theory, the spell would have ripped his body to shreds. Still, she now understood why Faisal admired him so deeply. Any ordinary person witnessing that spell would have fainted on the spot. This was the first time she'd encountered a swordsman who could keep his composure so effortlessly. Feeling genuinely remorseful for dragging him into an unexpected fight, Lucy invited him to the Magic Institute later, promising she'd personally make it up to him. Later that day, Beryl went about his usual routine, instructing the students at the training hall. During his break, he coincidentally ran into Faisal in the hallway, who had come by to deliver healing potions from the Magic Institute. She offered Beryl a potion, insisting he take it as an apology for Lucy's earlier behavior. Beryl initially tried to refuse, knowing just how expensive healing potions could be, but Faisal reassured him it was on the house this time. Beryl admitted to Faisal that up until now, he'd been half convinced Lucy really was just a young girl. Faisal laughed and clarified that Lucy used magic to maintain her youthful appearance. Her real age was anyone's guess. Still, Beryl found it incredible that someone so small could hold so much power. He confessed he genuinely feared for his life during their duel, and that he had no desire to face another wizard anytime soon. Faisal assured him Lucy was a unique exception. Most wizards couldn't cast spells as rapidly or continuously as she did. Faisal was confident Beryl could easily handle himself against the average wizard. At that moment, Alusha arrived, interrupting their conversation. She informed Beryl that he had just received a special request. Intrigued, Beryl followed her into another room where they find Shurna waiting. She explained that the Adventurers Guild had specifically asked Beryl to organize special training sessions for the newest adventurers, helping them prepare for their first dungeon exploration. The mention of rookie adventurers stirred up old memories for Beryl, reminding him of his own youthful dreams. Once upon a time, he'd aspired to become an adventurer himself, excited by the valuable treasures found in dungeons. But that dream didn't last long because he got his ass handed to him by monsters on day one and ran back home with a busted ego. And that was the end of his adventuring career. Beryl shared his concerns with Shurna and Alusha. pointing out that adventuring was a dangerous occupation. But that was precisely why they wanted him to handle the new adventurer's training. They assured him that all necessary preparations had already been taken care of, and the task wouldn't interfere with his existing role as a special instructor. In other words, there was nothing stopping him from accepting. Still, the final decision rested with Beryl, so Shurna suggested he come to the Adventurers Guild and discuss the job directly with the Guildmaster. Since the Adventurers Guild was close by, Shurna led Beryl there immediately, and upon entering the Guildmaster's office, Beryl was taken aback to find Lucy already sitting on the couch, waiting for him like it's totally normal. Turns out she caught wind of the job offer, and since she and the Guildmaster go way back, she sprinted over the second she heard about it because she was eager for another chance to meet him again. Shortly afterward, the Guildmaster Nidus introduced himself warmly. After hearing so many good things about Beryl from Shurna and Lucy, Nidus was absolutely convinced they'd chosen the perfect candidate. Beryl attempted to remind Nidus that he hadn't actually agreed to take the job yet, but Nidus cheerfully ignored his protests. Nidus then gestured toward his assistant Majin, instructing Beryl to speak with him about the specifics of the job. However, before discussing anything else, Majin wanted to clarify a few important points. He asked Beryl if he had any prior experience as an adventurer. Beryl honestly answered no, causing Majin to question whether he was truly qualified to instruct new adventurers. Beryl inwardly felt relieved at this skepticism, hoping it might provide him an excuse to avoid accepting the job. However, Majin's doubts immediately irritated Shurna and Lucy, who had both strongly vouched for Beryl. Majin calmly explained that he wasn't questioning Beryl's reputation out of disrespect. He simply wanted to ensure the adventurer's safety, especially since there had been recent reports of unusual monster activity. Nidus understood Majin's concerns and asked what Beryl would need to do in order to prove himself. After thinking for a moment, Majin declared that if Beryl could win a duel against Shurna, who held a prestigious black rank, he'd acknowledge Beryl's qualifications. Shurna enthusiastically agreed to the proposal, leaving Beryl with no room to argue. Seeing that everyone was on board, Nidus decided to arrange the duel immediately. Not long after, Beryl and Shurna were already standing face to face on the training grounds, surrounded by a large, enthusiastic crowd. Everyone was eager to see the legendary Shurna in action and to find out exactly who her opponent was. Shurna herself could hardly contain her excitement, thrilled by the opportunity to cross swords with her master once again. Back when Shurna was just a kid, she and her parents were traveling with a merchant caravan. During their journey, however, the caravan was suddenly attacked by a beast that tore the carriage apart. In a final desperate act to save their daughter, her parents threw her off a nearby cliff, making her the only one to survive that tragic day. When she finally regained consciousness, the first thing she saw was Beryl standing over her. He gently took Shurna back to his house, carefully treating her wounds, and once she had begun to recover, he started asking her some gentle questions. She managed to tell him her name was Shurna, but the moment he brought up her parents, she quickly became overwhelmed with panic. Noticing her distress, Beryl told her to forget the questions and just rest until she was ready. With no place else to go, Beryl approached his parents to see if they'd be willing to let her stay with them, at least until they found her a new home. His parents happily agreed, and from that moment onward, Shurna practically became part of their family. Initially, she struggled to open up and felt unsure about her new environment. But one morning, she caught sight of Beryl training diligently with his sword outside. Noticing her interest, Beryl warmly invited her to join him, sensing it might help her come out of her shell. From then on, Shurna spent as much time as she could training alongside Beryl. As he patiently taught her the fundamentals of swordsmanship, the bond between the two grew stronger day by day. Gradually, Shurna started becoming more outgoing and confident. One morning, as Beryl was preparing for classes at his dojo, he found Shurna already waiting outside, sword in hand, eager to train. With a smile, he invited her to join the class, pleased to see how seriously she took her training. Shurna had grown deeply attached to Beryl and his family, and would have been content to stay forever. Eventually, though, a family arrived, willing to adopt her. Beryl and his parents believed that moving in with a new family was best for Shurna's future, so they gently encouraged her to go. But deep down, Shurna truly didn't want to leave, yet she didn't want to burden Beryl either. So she thanked him sincerely for everything and reluctantly went her own way. Several years later, Shurna had already become a skilled gold-ranked adventurer. While on an escort mission, her caravan was suddenly ambushed by a group of bandits led by a swordsman infamous for his deadly skills. Her teammate warned her to be cautious, but before he even finished speaking, Shurna had already leaped fearlessly into battle, quickly defeating every bandit there without breaking a sweat. There were two main reasons Shurna had chosen to become an adventurer. Firstly, she was driven by a desire to prevent others from experiencing the same kind of tragedy she endured. Secondly, she wanted to honor everything Beryl taught her by putting her skills to real use. Now, with the opportunity to duel her former mentor after 20 long years, she was determined to show him just how far she had come. Beryl isn't exactly thrilled about the duel, but the excitement on Shurna's face was unmistakable. As her former master, he felt it was his duty to give her a fight worth remembering. As the match began, Shurna launches herself forward, unleashing a relentless barrage of swift and precise sword strikes. Her movements were incredibly fast, yet Beryl matched each of them effortlessly, leaving her unable to land even a single blow. Shurna's excitement only grew as they fought, enjoying every second of the chance to battle someone at full strength without holding back. For his part, Beryl was genuinely proud to see how far Shurna had come. It was clear she dedicated herself fully to training ever since she left him. But she's not quite flawless yet because he spots a slight stiffness in her left-hand swings. It's subtle, but enough for him to exploit. With perfect timing, he slipped his sword through the handle of her blade, disarming her in one swift move. Shurna quickly tried to counterattack with her other sword, but Beryl smoothly swept her legs from beneath her, leaving her sprawled on the ground with his blade pointed gently at her neck. With that, Beryl officially won the duel. The audience around them erupted into applause, and the others quickly came down to congratulate him. Majin approached, sincerely apologizing for ever doubting Beryl's abilities. Beryl brushed it off kindly, assuring him it was completely normal to be skeptical of a teacher he'd never seen in action. Now fully convinced of Beryl's strength, Majin gladly welcomed him as the guild's special instructor. The next morning, Beryl found himself standing in front of a dungeon entrance with his new adventurer students, Porta, Nidri, and Sarlakat. As they ventured into the dungeon, Sarlakat's magic watch began to glow, warning them of 6 monsters lying ahead. The students immediately prepared for battle. Beryl and Shurna were there only to oversee their safety, so they stepped back, allowing the students to handle the monsters on their own. The three quickly engaged with the goblins and managed to defeat them swiftly, demonstrating impressive teamwork and coordination. As they continued deeper into the dungeon, the rest of the exploration went smoothly. Soon enough, they had explored the entire dungeon without any serious incidents and began to make their way back toward the entrance. While returning, Beryl felt slightly uneasy, noticing there seemed to be fewer monsters than he expected. Suddenly, as Porta moved toward the dungeon's exit, Sarlakat's magic watch violently shattered, detecting something far more powerful than it was designed for. Beryl urgently shouted a warning to Porta, but it was too late because Porta was suddenly grabbed by the unseen threat. The young adventurer was badly wounded, but still alive, desperately in need of immediate medical attention. However, Beryl and Shurna knew they couldn't help him until the powerful creature was dealt with first, and that wouldn't be easy. Standing before them was a legendary monster known as a Xenograble, a specially designated target, infamous for its terrifying strength. Even the most seasoned adventurers would struggle to survive an encounter with such a beast. Yet there was no choice. Beryl and Shurna prepared themselves, ready to fight for their lives. Beryl then began kicking himself internally, seriously questioning why he even agreed to tag along on this damn mission. Still, at least Shurna's here, and with her being a black-ranked adventurer, taking down a griffin should be a walk in the park for her. And he thinks that while she's busy handling that beast, he'll bolt over and help Porta out. But just as he reaches his hand for the healing potion that she have, Shurna was already on the same wavelength, slaps him a quick high five and smiles, saying she'll take care of Porta, and he can focus on wrecking that damn griffin. And unfortunately for Beryl, he doesn't even get the chance to protest because the griffin suddenly lunges at him, forcing him to dodge quickly, leaving him no option but to engage in combat. As the griffin swipes at him, Beryl adeptly deflects its claws with his sword, and when a chance arises, he swiftly targets the griffin's legs. But badly for him, the creature's scales are incredibly tough, rendering his strike ineffective. He's essentially stuck on the defensive now, but he needs to hold out long enough for Shurna to secure Porta's safety. But then while he glances back to check on Shurna, he momentarily drops his guard, nearly costing him his life. Thankfully, he manages to block the griffin's attack just in time. Although he's still severely wounded, he needs a strategy to bring this creature down fast, or it'll finish him off first. Normally, Beryl would concentrate his strikes on the monster's head, but since it can breathe fire, there's no chance he can approach it head-on. Instead, Beryl decides to flank it, but the griffin notices him immediately and counters by swinging its tail. Nevertheless, Beryl swiftly recovers and cleanly severs the griffin's tail in one strike. This sends the griffin into a fury, prompting it to launch a huge fireball at Beryl, who barely manages to leap out of the way. He expected the griffin to become enraged after losing its tail, but he didn't anticipate it charging directly at him. The griffin crashes headfirst into Beryl, and although the impact hurts like hell, he's still standing, allowing him to reposition himself and try to weather the creature's rampage. But that's far more challenging than anticipated, since Beryl is now desperately clinging to the griffin's back as it suddenly takes flight, soaring straight upward. A fall from this altitude would surely kill him, so he holds on for dear life, which only serves to infuriate the griffin further. It eventually descends again, allowing Beryl to leap off. But now the griffin is fully unleashing its power. It uses magic to heat the earth beneath it, transforming the ground into molten lava. So Beryl scrambles onto a rock to prevent himself from being burned alive. But he's not the only one at risk because the lava is flowing toward the caves, and it's only a matter of moments before the trapped young kids inside turn crispy. Beryl then hears the kids' desperate cries for help, so he pushes aside any thoughts of self-preservation and immediately charges across the lava, relying on his boots to keep him from getting scorched for now. He clashes with the griffin again, but even now, he struggles to pierce through its armor like hide. The beast then unleashes another barrage of fireballs, forcing Beryl into a frantic dance of dodging and weaving across the molten ground. One of the blasts detonates near him, sending Beryl flying into the air, but he manages to turn the momentum to his advantage, plunging his sword straight into the griffin's eye midair. The griffin howls in agony, thrashing violently to throw him off. The good news is that now the monster is half blind with Beryl's sword lodged deep into its eye socket. The bad news? Beryl is now weaponless, with no blade left to defend himself or counterattack, and the griffin, driven wild by pain, looks ready to tear him apart. Just as it seems like all hope is lost, the griffin suddenly glances upward, and there soaring down from the cliff above is Shurna. She descends at full speed, crashing into the griffin with a devastating blow that slams it into the ground. And before the beast can recover, Shurna reacts swiftly, slicing its throat in one clean strike, ending the battle once and for all. Shurna then spots Beryl's broken blade jutting from the griffin's ruined eye and quickly apologizes, feeling guilty for not being there to help him sooner. Beryl brushes off her apology, saying he's not worried about that right now because what matters most are the trainees' safety. Right on cue, the kids emerge from the cave, miraculously unharmed aside from a few minor burns. Relieved, the group returns to the Adventurers Guild to report the incident. The guildmaster is absolutely floored when he hears that Beryl and Shurna managed to defeat a named monster. Shurna wastes no time giving credit where it's due, stating that if Beryl hadn't been there to support them, she likely wouldn't have made it through the fight. Beryl tries to point out that Shurna delivered the final blow, but she clearly isn't interested in taking any of the spotlight for herself. Impressed by their success, the guildmaster promises to repay Beryl someday for his efforts. But for now, though, he offers Beryl a formal invitation to join the Adventurers Guild as a full-fledged adventurer. But Beryl immediately turns him down without a second thought. Afterward, Beryl and Shurna step outside, and Shurna apologizes once again, admitting that Beryl only got dragged into all this because she had been bragging about his strength to everyone. Beryl assures her that he doesn't mind, though he still feels like he's not deserving of all the praise being thrown his way. Still, Shurna insists that he was truly incredible out there, and she's grateful she got to stand beside him in a real fight where their lives were on the line. Beryl thanks her too, pointing out that every decision she made was on the mark, and it's thanks to her judgment that everyone came back alive. Shurna lights up hearing his words, though she humbly says she doesn't think she earned such praise. But Beryl disagrees, telling her flat out that she's grown into a fantastic adventurer and deserves every bit of the recognition. The following morning, Beryl wakes up early, determined to deal with his broken sword. The problem is, he's not familiar with the capital's layout yet, so he asks Kiruni if she can show him the way to a blacksmith. He thanks her for accepting the favor on such short notice, but Kirini says she was heading to the blacksmith anyway, so it's no trouble at all. And of course, Alusha decides to tag along too, not because she's jealous or anything. She claims she's tagging along purely because choosing a new sword is an important matter, and she wants to help Beryl pick wisely. But deep down, she knows she's already missed so many chances to spend time with him, and she can't let this one slip away too. Eventually, they arrive at the blacksmith's workshop, where the owner steps out to greet Kirini. However, his attention quickly snaps to Beryl, and the man freezes, looking absolutely stunned. Turns out, this blacksmith Balder used to be one of Beryl's students back in the day. And yes, even though he was technically older than Beryl at the time, he still trained under him. Balder had wanted to master swordsmanship because he believed it would make him a better blacksmith, and despite the age difference, he had taken Beryl's lessons very seriously. Judging by the impressive shop he's built, it's clear that Balder's dedication paid off. And since everyone is gathered here, Balder asks what they need help with. Kirini steps forward first, mentioning she needs her short sword sharpened. Balder happily agrees and asks her to hand it over. Kirini passes him the blade, and Balder examines it carefully, turning it over in his hands. After a long moment of silence, he lets out a deep sigh, drops the sword onto the counter, and tells her bluntly that the weapon is beyond saving because she's completely ruined it. Alusha then comments that it is strange that Kirini managed to ruin her sword, considering how careful and precise she usually is during training. But if that's really the case, then there's only one logical explanation, and Beryl quickly catches on. He turns to Kirini and asks her what it feels like when she holds the short sword. After thinking about it for a second, Kirini replies that the sword feels light to her, and the moment Beryl and Balder hear that, they both immediately realize what the issue is. They explain to Kirini that she isn't cut out for wielding a short sword, because if you can't properly feel the weight of your weapon, you'll never be able to use it effectively. With that settled, they agree it's time to find her a new blade. Beryl then suggests that she might actually be better suited for a two-handed greatsword. Kirini may look small, but she's strong enough to handle the extra weight without much trouble. He hands her a greatsword to try out, and even though it feels a lot heavier than what she's used to, it's still manageable. Confident she can swing it well enough, Kirini decides to buy it, especially since Beryl recommended it himself. Plus, she thinks it looks awesome slung across her back. With Kirini's business taken care of, Beryl starts browsing Balder's selection to find a replacement for his own broken sword. However, Alusha immediately jumps in, insisting that a swordsman of his level should have a custom forged weapon. But Beryl doesn't really think that's necessary. He figures any good quality sword from here should be more than enough for him. But while he's still browsing, the front door bursts open and Shurna walks in, lugging a massive sack over her shoulder. Then the moment Alusha and Shurna make eye contact, they start bickering as usual because neither of them can stand the other. Beryl quickly steps in to steer the conversation back on track and asks Shurna why she's here. Shurna explains that she's got a special job for Balder, and then she slams the sack onto the counter and pulls it open to reveal the leg of the griffin they defeated together. She tells Balder that she wants him to forge a long sword out of the beast's remains. Balder is stunned because it's the first time he's ever been asked to craft a sword from a named monster's corpse. Still, he's a bit puzzled why Shurna would want a long sword, considering she's famous for her twin blade style. But Shurna clarifies that the sword isn't for her. It's meant to be a gift for Beryl. Beryl immediately protests, saying he doesn't deserve something so valuable. He reminds her that she was the one who delivered the final blow to the griffin, so she should be the one to keep the material. But she's adamant about it, insisting that gifting him this sword is the least she can do to make up for the blade he lost during the fight. Balder then cuts in the conversation and tells Beryl to just accept the damn gift already. Not because he's siding with Shurna, but because he's genuinely excited about crafting a legendary sword from named monster materials. And seeing no way around it, Beryl finally agrees to let Balder use the griffin's leg to forge a blade for him. Although judging by the glint in Balder's eye, he can already tell this blacksmith is planning something outrageous. So he warns Balder that he only wants a normal, practical sword, and Balder solemnly promises he won't create anything ridiculous. Yet for some reason, Beryl doesn't feel very reassured. Either way, Balder says it'll take a week to complete his masterpiece, and Beryl is fine with that schedule. Then, since their errands are now finished, Beryl suggests they head out. Just as he says that, Kirini steps up to him with a cheerful grin, asking for a quick favor. Fast forward to the dojo, and we see Kirani holding a wooden version of her new greatsword. And since she's never used a weapon like this before, she asked Beryl to give her some private coaching. Beryl explains that a greatsword has two major advantages. First, it lets you deliver massive force behind your swings, so it's best to focus on wide, lateral strikes to maximize momentum. Second, you can grip it by the ricasso to boost control during combat. Kirani tests it out, and as she swings, it sparks a rush of old memories. Back when she trained under Beryl at his dojo, she spent countless hours practicing basic sword forms just like this. Later that evening, Beryl is walking home alone when he notices a small child approaching him from the opposite direction. Normally, he wouldn't think much of it, but as they pass, the girl suddenly tries to slip her hand inside his jacket to steal his wallet. Beryl instantly catches her wrist before she can escape, but the little thief blasts him in the face with fire magic to break free. Forced to shield himself, Beryl has no choice but to let go, and she bolts off into the night. The girl eventually makes her way into a battered old building filled with rough-looking men gambling and drinking. As she walks past them, she tosses a small pile of stolen money onto the table. The men grumble, disappointed with how little she brought back, accusing her of slacking off. But their boss quickly silences them, reminding everyone that Mui would never dare to slack off because she understands the consequences if she ever crosses him. Mui stays stone-faced, knowing exactly how brutal the boss can be, so she cannot afford to repeat more damn mistakes. But then a wave of panic hits her because she notices that she has lost something important. And then we notice that in her rush to escape from Beryl, she accidentally dropped her ring, and we see that Beryl now has it in his possession. The next morning in the training hall, Kirani keeps honing her skills with her newly claimed greatsword, while on the far side of the hall, Henblitz is locked in another sparring match with Beryl. So far, Henblitz hasn't been able to land a single clean hit on him. Determined, he charges in for one last strike, pretending to go for an overhead slash before quickly shifting his blade toward Beryl's torso. Beryl catches on to the sneaky, clever feint, but still counters it with ease, defeating Henblitz like always. Henblitz expresses his gratitude for the lesson, and Beryl commends him for improving so significantly in such a short period. The maneuver was nearly flawless, yet still not quick enough to surpass Beryl's reactions. Right at that moment, Henblitz glances toward Kirani and comments on how courageous it was for her to abruptly switch to a completely new weapon, adding that she shows considerable potential. Moreover, it's crucial for the Knight's Order to enhance its combat abilities so they can confront the notorious bandit group known as the Dark Hand of Twilight. The Twilight Thieves have recently started operating within the capital, causing significant disruptions, prompting the Royal Guard and the Knight's Order to launch an investigation. Once they pinpoint the thieves' hideout, they intend to raid it immediately and capture every member. But as a precaution, they'll require all the manpower they can gather, and Kirani happens to possess impressive strength. Naturally, Henblitz believes Beryl alone would likely be more than capable of taking down the Twilight Thieves single-handedly, but he prefers not to trouble Beryl with mundane tasks like this. He reassures him that the Knight's Order can handle the fighting entirely on their own, which is perfectly fine with Beryl, since he wasn't particularly eager to get involved anyway. He's never dealt with ordinary criminals before and doesn't plan to start now. But then he recalls the ring he obtained from the pickpocket yesterday and wonders if it might be useful in their investigation. Yet, the moment Kirani spots the ring in his hand, she jumps to the conclusion that Beryl's planning to gift it to someone, and Henblitz seems to agree. But before Beryl can correct them, Kirani chimes in, teasing that he might want to choose a bigger ring if he's planning to propose to Alusha, because this one looks tiny and probably only fits a child's finger. Beryl is completely baffled at how they've reached this wild assumption, but finally manages to speak up and clarify that the ring isn't a gift. He explains that yesterday, he was targeted by a pickpocket, and luckily he caught the thief's wrist before she could grab anything, but she still managed to escape after catching him off guard by casting fire magic. Kirani finds the whole situation peculiar because if the girl truly was capable of using magic, she wouldn't have any reason to resort to pickpocketing. Magic is an extremely rare ability, so anyone capable of casting spells can enroll at the Magic Institute free of charge, where all their living costs are fully covered. Henblitz speculates that perhaps the girl was using some sort of enchanted accessory to produce the fire, but regardless, he asks Beryl what he intends to do with the ring. Beryl replies he has no interest in keeping it, and since it's probably stolen property, he'd prefer returning it to whoever originally owned it. If that's the case, Henblitz advises him to leave the ring at the Knight's Order front desk. And that's precisely what Beryl proceeds to do. Now that the matter of the ring is settled, Beryl doesn't plan on becoming involved further. After all, he didn't actually lose anything to the thief, and he certainly isn't interested in tracking her down. Yet somehow the expression she had when he caught her continues to bother him. While strolling through the city later, Beryl decides to check out local housing options, as he can't realistically live at an inn forever. But the prices nearly cause him to faint from shock. Technically, he can afford it considering the salary provided by the Knight's Order, but it's still a huge amount of money to spend. At that moment, he notices a girl standing behind him, seemingly searching for something, so he approaches to see if she needs assistance. But once he gets a closer view of her face, he immediately recognizes her as the girl who attempted to rob him the previous night. He asks if she might be searching for a certain ring, but as soon as she hears him mention it, the girl instantly attacks him, thinking he's stolen it. Beryl quickly asks her to calm down, as he'd prefer not to create a public spectacle. First of all, he explains to her that he left the ring at the Knight's Order front desk, meaning he no longer has it in his possession, and the girl clearly can't just stroll into the Knight's Order headquarters to reclaim it. Secondly, Beryl questions whether she actually stole the ring herself, as it's strange she'd go through all this trouble to retrieve it unless it was personally valuable to her. She firmly states she didn't steal the ring, and that's sufficient for Beryl, so he instructs her to follow him so he can help her recover it. Mui initially hesitates to accompany him, but he points out it would be difficult for her to prove ownership on her own. But if Beryl personally vouches for her, retrieving the ring shouldn't take much time at all. Mui reluctantly agrees to follow along, though she clearly conveys that she's far from pleased about the arrangement. Then after they make it to the Knight's Order headquarters, Beryl retrieves the ring, but before handing it over to Mui, he says he wants to talk with her briefly. At that very moment, Alusha steps outside, and when she notices Beryl arguing with Mui, the first thing she assumes is that the girl must be some secret love child he's been hiding, though Beryl immediately denies this claim. They all go inside, allowing Beryl a chance to fully explain the entire situation to Alusha, and once she's aware of what's happening, she asks Beryl how he'd prefer to handle Mui. Typically as a knight, Alusha would be responsible for arresting Mui due to theft, but Beryl prefers not to get her into trouble. He then directly asks Mui if she'll stop pickpocketing if he lets her leave. But instead of answering his question, she merely demands he return the ring to her. She obviously has no intention of quitting stealing, but her unwillingness to lie about it convinces Beryl she's fundamentally an honest child. Alusha then recalls hearing that Mui had used magic against Beryl, prompting her to inquire whether she used a magical item or if the magic was innate. Mui says she cast the spell on her own, so Alusha explains that if she truly possesses magical talent, the kingdom would gladly take responsibility for her welfare, meaning she wouldn't need to rely on stealing anymore. Mui gradually begins to open up, eventually revealing that she can't stop pickpocketing because she urgently needs 5 million dalk. Her boss promised her that if she gives him that exact amount, he'll use magic to resurrect her sister. But since she doesn't have enough time to earn that damn money through legal means, she turned to crime instead. Beryl instantly recognizes that Mui's boss must be deceiving her because resurrection simply isn't possible, though he's aware there's no chance she would believe him if he tried telling her that now. At this point, Alusha decides to leave temporarily, stating there's something important she needs to verify. Meanwhile, Beryl and Mui remain alone together. Beryl kindly asks her if she would like some cookies, and although Mui declines, it's obvious she's hungry, so he comes up with an alternative idea. He briefly steps away and returns shortly after with a loaf of bread for Mui. The moment he hands it over, Mui tears into it ravenously. Watching her eat, Beryl feels relieved that he ran into her today because he's been worried ever since he saw the sadness in her eyes yesterday, so being able to help her, even just a little, makes him feel pleased. With all of that said, he decides he's kept Mui long enough and returns the ring to her. And now that she's recovered what she came for, Mui announces she's leaving. But right before she can exit, Lucy suddenly storms in after Alusha informed her about Mui's magical talent. Lucy introduces herself as the leader of the Magical Corps and warmly invites Mui to enroll at the Magical Institute, emphasizing they're always eager to welcome new magic users. Nevertheless, Mui declines the offer, explaining that attending the Magical Institute won't help her earn the 5 million dalk she needs. Lucy then inquires about the reason Mui needs such an enormous sum, prompting Mui to reveal she intends to pay a wizard to resurrect her deceased sister. But the moment Mui says that shit, Lucy immediately informs her that she's being tricked, since resurrection magic simply doesn't exist. Despite Lucy's words, Mui stubbornly insists her sister really can be resurrected because she personally witnessed it, or at least that's what she believes happened. In reality, as seen in her memories, all the supposed wizard actually did was slightly move her sister's corpse, and Mui, overcome with grief, instantly believed he genuinely had the power to resurrect her sibling. The wizard then claimed it would require 5 million dalk to fully revive Mui's sister, and since then she's resorted to stealing to accumulate that money. Lucy feels sympathetic toward Mui for falling victim to such a cruel deception, but again firmly emphasizes to her that resurrection magic simply doesn't exist. Mui angrily accuses Lucy of lying, but Lucy clarifies that she's an extremely respected mage who studied magic for several hundred years. Therefore, if resurrection magic truly existed, she'd definitely know about it far earlier than some random fraudulent wizard. At this point, Mui begins realizing she may have indeed been deceived, prompting Lucy to request the identity of the wizard responsible for this situation. Mui suspiciously asks why Lucy wants to know, so Lucy calmly explains that she plans to confront the wizard directly to determine whether he's genuinely capable of resurrection magic or simply deceiving her. In the highly unlikely event that he's being truthful, Lucy vows she'll personally pay the 5 million dalk needed to revive Mui's sister. However, if the man is indeed lying, then he has dishonored Mui's sister's memory, something Lucy absolutely refuses to forgive. Mui reluctantly reveals the wizard's name is Twilight, the same as the infamous leader of the Twilight Thieves, prompting Lucy to ask Mui to immediately lead her to him. Alucia volunteers to join as well, but her presence as a knight would attract too damn much attention, so she asks Beryl to accompany them instead. Shortly after, they reach the entrance to Twilight's hideout, and Beryl is surprised that a thieves' den is located directly off the main street. Beryl begins to regret not borrowing an actual sword for this confrontation, but Lucy reassures him that, given his abilities, a wooden sword should be entirely sufficient against ordinary bandits. There's no reason to delay any further, so Lucy blasts open the front door, instantly drawing the attention of several thieves. One of the thieves attempts to grab Lucy by her quarter melon, but she has no time to waste on a pervert like him, so she effortlessly blows the attacker aside and instructs Beryl to handle the rest while she confronts Twilight personally. The thieves then notice Mui standing behind Beryl, recognizing her as the traitor who exposed their location, prompting one of them to rush at her aggressively. However, Beryl swiftly jabs him right in the throat. He's only wielding a wooden sword, so the bandits probably won't suffer anything fatal, but a hit to the throat with a wooden blade still stings like hell, making them think twice before advancing further. As Beryl occupies the enemies upstairs, Lucy makes her way into the basement to challenge Twilight. The moment he spots her, he uses a magical accessory to drop ice projectiles onto Lucy. But Lucy is an extremely skilled mage, so a simple attack like this can't possibly hold her back. She effortlessly melts through the ice, though Twilight quickly pulls out another magical accessory, employing telekinesis to lift Lucy into the air, and she immediately realizes this must be how he deceived Mui. Twilight openly admits he used telekinesis to manipulate her sister's corpse, and then pretended it was necromancy, mocking how absurdly naive Mui had been to genuinely believe he possessed resurrection powers. He then forms a fireball, intending to eliminate Lucy once and for all. But Lucy's patience has completely worn thin by now, so she swiftly unleashes a wind spell directly at Twilight and knocks him unconscious with the force. At the same time upstairs, Beryl had already taken care of nearly all the thugs, but one of them staggered back to his feet and started calling Mui an ungrateful kid after everything Twilight supposedly did for her. That insult really set Beryl off, so he struck him in the throat again, knocking the man out flat. Shortly after, Lucy came up from the basement, dragging Twilight's limp body with her, and she demanded he tell Mui the truth unless he wanted to get blasted with wind magic again. Twilight reluctantly admits to Mui that he'd been lying about resurrection magic all along, leaving Mui absolutely heartbroken as she realizes this means her sister was truly gone for good. Now that all the thieves have been neutralized, Lucy announces she'll go alert the Knight's Order so they can arrest Twilight and his gang. A little while later, all the captured bandits have been loaded onto a cart to be taken away to prison. Alicia thanks Beryl and Lucy for their valuable assistance. However, there's still plenty of investigating left to do, because those magical accessories Twilight had been using were far too powerful for someone like him to acquire alone. That implies there's someone else manipulating events behind the scenes, and they need to figure out exactly who that person is. As Twilight and the rest of the thugs were being hauled away, an unknown man was secretly watching quietly from the shadows. The hooded figure then extends his hand toward the cart, and abruptly Twilight's body begins glowing from within, moments before he suffers an agonizing death. Later, the hooded man reports to his superior that Twilight has been effectively silenced, thanks to the magical device they implanted inside him, eliminating any possibility of their plans being exposed. The Pope was pleased by the news, since he planned to use the corpses Twilight had gathered to craft his own version of a miracle, and he wasn't going to let anything interfere with his ambitions now. The next morning, right after Beryl wrapped up his training with the knights, Alicia approached him with some urgent news. She told him that during Twilight's escort last night, he suddenly exploded without any sign or reason, leaving behind nothing but a bizarre magical artifact. At the moment, the Magic Corps was investigating its origin, but so far, they hadn't turned up any damn thing helpful. Beryl asked about the bodies that had disappeared under Twilight's supervision, and Alicia had already tried interrogating some of his subordinates, but none of them had a clue about what he'd done with those corpses. Everything was pointing to the idea that Twilight had been following someone else's orders, and they needed to find out who it was as quickly as possible. Later in the day, Beryl headed back to the smithy to pick up his new sword, and honestly, he was blown away by the craftsmanship. He couldn't wait to test it out once he got back to training with Curiny. But as he approached the hall, he noticed Lucy standing outside, clearly waiting for him, and it looked like whatever she was here for was serious. Lucy said she had something important to discuss, so she invited him to her home for a private conversation. A short while later, they arrived at Lucy's place, and Beryl was shocked because he had no clue she lived in a mansion this impressive. While they were walking in, he asked about Mui, and Lucy mentioned she was still trying to talk her into studying magic. Once they stepped inside, Lucy poured herself some tea before finally introducing Beryl to the man sitting opposite him. His name was Ibroy Hellman, and he was a priest from the Church of Sohin. Beryl greeted him politely, but he couldn't imagine why someone from the church was here. Lucy clarified that all the magic devices Twilight had been using were manufactured by the nation of Sohin, but they'd ended up in the hands of a criminal like Twilight thanks to a bishop named Revios Sarlian. And in exchange for providing those magic devices, Bishop Revios demanded Twilight deliver dead bodies to him. Now it made sense why Twilight had been silenced with that magic device. But Beryl still couldn't wrap his head around why Revios would even want dead bodies to begin with. Ibroy explains that within the Sohin Church, magic is viewed as a divine blessing, and among all miracles that can be performed, there is one believed to be nearly impossible, and it's bringing someone back from the dead. Obviously, Ibroy himself doubts that true resurrection is even possible, but it's likely Revios is secretly researching exactly that, which explains why he needed those corpses. Given that Ibroy already knows all this, Beryl asks why he hasn't intervened to stop Revios yet, but apparently, it's not quite that straightforward. Currently, Revios is staying at the Sohin Church located in the town's northern area, and the Knight's Order intends to summon him tomorrow for questioning. Ideally, he'll cooperate with the investigation, but there's a real risk he'll try escaping toward the border. If Revios reaches Sohin territory, the Order loses all authority over him. That's precisely why they're asking for Beryl's assistance. They need someone capable enough to intercept Revios if he makes a run for it. Under normal circumstances, either the Knight's Order or the Magic Corps could easily arrest him. But forcibly detaining a bishop from Sohin could spark major diplomatic trouble. Ibroy himself isn't powerful enough to confront a bishop directly, either. However, Beryl is not only strong enough to handle Revios, but also has no formal connection to the Liberus Kingdom, making him a politically safe choice for the job. Lucy has already briefed Lucia about everything, so Beryl officially has permission to use whatever means necessary to stop Revios, but only if he attempts to flee. If the accusations against Revios are true, Lucy wants to ensure he's properly punished for his actions. Personally, Beryl doesn't really care about some bishop experimenting with resurrection, but there's a chance he might be able to retrieve Mui's sister's remains. Her sister isn't going to miraculously come back to life, But if Mui could at least give her sister a proper goodbye, it might help her finally move forward. So after some thought, Beryl decides to accept Lucy's request. Lucy thanks him sincerely, promising she'll make sure he's generously compensated. Just as Beryl opens the front door to leave, he nearly collides with Mui, who's returning from a trip to the market. Mui clearly didn't expect to see Beryl today, so she curiously asks what he's doing there. Beryl explains he just stopped by briefly to discuss something with Lucy. That said, he admits he's glad he ran into Mui, and even happier to see that she's doing all right. Mui still couldn't fully grasp why Beryl and Lucy had gone out of their way to help someone like her. She'd been nothing but a petty thief who tried robbing Beryl, yet they rescued her from Twilight's grasp, gave her a safe place to live, and continued looking after her. So she just couldn't wrap her head around why they cared this damn much. Beryl understood how overwhelmed she must feel, given that her entire life flipped upside down overnight, but he told her not to dwell on it too much. Nobody here would ever trick or exploit her like Twilight did, so from this point on, she could just relax and enjoy being young. Mui asked if it was really okay for her to live a good life now, and Beryl reassured her she absolutely deserved a bright future. He reached out to pat her head, but she swatted his hand away, clearly annoyed at being treated like a kid. Beryl decided to leave her alone for now, knowing she'd eventually open up to everyone in her own time, and a short while later, he left Lucy's place. That night, Beryl was silently moving around the church in the northern district to check if Revios was making any suspicious moves. Sure enough, he caught sight of Revios and his men hurriedly packing their belongings, clearly planning to flee the country. Beryl tried sneaking around the back entrance to intercept Revios, but he was abruptly stopped by a cloaked figure. The mysterious man recognized Beryl immediately as the person who took down Twilight's entire crew, and apparently he'd already expected that Beryl would show up here to get in their way. Beryl knew this wouldn't go smoothly, but he still tried telling them that Revios was summoned for questioning tomorrow and wasn't permitted to leave the country. Unsurprisingly, the cloaked man completely ignored that order and summoned 3 swordsmen to handle Beryl instead. He even granted them permission to use magic, prompting the 3 fighters to connect their sword tips and chant a spell, boosting their physical speed and strength dramatically. Now they moved far quicker than before, and Beryl knew things were about to get challenging. And with the 3 swordsmen busy distracting Beryl, Revios and the cloaked man retreated back into the church to finish gathering their things before escaping. It had been a long time since Beryl fought in a situation that demanded lethal force, but if he held back now, he'd end up dead. Then, as the first swordsman rushed toward him, Beryl quickly sidestepped and slashed him deeply across the torso. Seeing how dangerous he actually was, the remaining 2 attackers decided to strike together, aiming to hold Beryl off until backup arrived. At this point, Beryl found himself completely surrounded by 5 magically enhanced attackers, and even he knew that fighting all of them alone might be pushing his limits. But thankfully, he wasn't fighting solo, because just as one swordsman was about to cut Beryl down, a sudden wind spell blew the guy's sword straight out of his grip. Faisal quickly ran up to Beryl's side and announced she was here to back him up, with Kiruni close behind. But Beryl couldn't figure out why the 2 of them were here. After all, the entire point of sending him was to ensure the Knight's Order and Magic Corps wouldn't directly intervene. The pair explained they weren't officially ordered to come, they just happened to be nearby, saw Beryl in trouble, and decided to jump in to lend a hand. Beryl wasn't exactly convinced by that reasoning, but honestly, he appreciated the backup. So together, the 3 of them started to take down their attackers one by one. At one moment, Beryl clashed swords fiercely with one of the attackers, and seconds later, the blue aura around the man suddenly disappeared. The swordsman went stiff and collapsed immediately afterward, so Beryl quickly moved in to knock him unconscious, though he was confused about what had just happened. Faisal pointed out that the magical enhancement spell they'd cast was probably wearing off, causing them severe backlash. Now, weakened by their own spells, they'd be easy pickings. Still, there were more reinforcements rapidly approaching their position, so Faisal and Kiruni told Beryl they'd handle things here, urging him to chase down Revios. Beryl thanked them both for the assistance and sprinted into the church, intent on catching Revios. But before he could get close, Spur blocked his path, allowing Revios to start chanting a spell behind him. Spur told Beryl he'd have the privilege of witnessing Revios' lifelong ambition, the miracle of bringing the dead back to life. Once Revios finished chanting, several nearby coffins began rattling violently. Moments later, the bodies within started moving, proving that Revios had actually succeeded in his resurrection magic research, or at least halfway succeeded, because these resurrected bodies were essentially just shambling zombies. Among the resurrected corpses, Beryl recognized Mui's sister, and it immediately brought back how desperately Mui had wished for her sister's revival. But seeing her like this, Beryl knew this was absolutely not the reunion Mui had hoped for, forcing him into an impossible choice. He needed to destroy the revived bodies, and as one zombie reached out to grab his leg, Beryl immediately swung his sword, severing its head. The zombie burst into blue flames, prompting Beryl to dispatch the others similarly until only Mui's sister was left standing. He'd wanted to return her sister's body so that Mui could finally grieve properly, but that clearly wasn't an option anymore. With a heavy heart, Beryl embraced her and apologized softly, and then swiftly struck at her neck. Mui's sister disintegrated into bright blue flames, leaving only a ring behind. But before Beryl could catch his breath, Spur rushed back to attack him head-on. Beryl deflected the initial strike, but Spur was far more skilled than he'd anticipated, quickly catching him off guard and plunging a blade into Beryl's shoulder. Still, Beryl wasn't about to roll over and lose here. He quickly recovered his footing and charged back toward Spur without hesitation. As Spur swung again, Beryl dodged skillfully, countering with a precise strike across Spur's shoulder. Spur was genuinely stunned because he'd never imagined an older man like Beryl could match him blow for blow, especially after boosting himself with magic. But Spur still had one last desperate trick, pulling out a dagger and stabbing himself in the side, using the pain to fuel an even greater surge in power. Once again, Spur rushed at Beryl, and this time, Beryl found himself struggling to fend off Spur's relentless swordplay, accumulating numerous minor wounds across his body. Spur was undoubtedly one of the strongest foes Beryl had faced in a long time, but surrender wasn't an option. If he couldn't match Spur's raw speed, then he'd simply need to outsmart him. As Spur lunged forward again, Beryl leaned into the attack, intentionally letting the blade injure his arm to break Spur's stance. Although this inflicted severe injury to Beryl himself, it created the critical opening he needed to bypass Spur's defense and land a decisive slash across his torso. That strike should have ended the fight, but somehow Spur remained standing. Even as the backlash from his magic enhancement hit him full force, Spur continued stumbling forward like a freaking zombie, body battered and blood dripping from countless wounds, unwilling to admit defeat. Beryl told Spur to stop fighting because it was already over and he'd clearly lost. But as long as Spur had even a breath left in his lungs, he refused to yield. Beryl was genuinely stunned and disturbed by Spur's unbreakable determination, but it didn't take long before the accumulated wounds finally overwhelmed him, and Spur collapsed lifeless to the ground. With the fight finally over, Beryl headed outside, relieved to find Kiruni and Faisal had successfully apprehended Revios, so he quickly thanked them both for handling things so efficiently. Beryl then turned to Revios, but he saw no regret or remorse whatsoever on his face. Even when they told him Spur was defeated, Revios just shrugged it off, claiming that Spur had surely been more than willing to sacrifice himself for their cause. He added that capturing him wouldn't make any real difference because without creating a miracle of blood, the entire world was doomed anyway. Beryl had no clue what Revios was babbling about, but he figured it was just some crazy nonsense. The next morning, he went to see Lucy to fill her in on everything that had happened, though he still felt pretty terrible about not being able to recover Mui's sister's body. Lucy noticed he was feeling down, so to cheer him up, she told him to follow her because she had a reward ready for him. She brought him to a nice house right in the center of town and announced this was his reward. Beryl was a bit taken aback, but he'd been looking for a home lately, so the timing couldn't have been better. Lucy urged him to go inside and take a look, and when he opened the door, he was surprised to see Mui sweeping the hallway. Confused, he asked her what exactly she was doing there. Lucy explained that after their talk last night, Mui had finally agreed to enroll in the Magic Academy. But to do that, she'd need a legal guardian, which meant from now on, Mui would be living with Beryl, who would be taking on the role of her guardian. It's been 5 days since Beryl started living in his new place, and while having a home with a backyard and working water felt like a huge upgrade, he was still trying to adapt to the new routine. Adding to that, he now had to take care of a teenage girl completely on his own. A little later, Mui came down to eat, and when Beryl asked if the meal was any good, she just muttered that it was acceptable, as long as it was food. Changing the subject, Beryl offers to take care of her laundry from yesterday, but she insists on doing it herself, which would be okay, except the last time Beryl left it up to her. Mui just poured water on them and considered it done. There's an awkward silence between them for a few seconds after that, until Mui finally says something. But she isn't trying to chat or anything. She's simply asking for permission to use the bathroom. Beryl reminds her that this is also her home, so there's no need to ask about stuff like that. Mui says she gets it and promises she won't ask him for permission ever again. But based on how she said that, Beryl gets the feeling it'll probably become an issue later. Beryl's worked around plenty of teens Mui's age before, but actually caring for one is a completely different situation. Anyway, it'll be tough living together if she stays so guarded around him all the time, so he needs to find a way to get closer to her. He recalls that Kiruni and Faisal really enjoy skewers from the market, so he buys one for Mui and asks if she likes it. She says she does, but her expression doesn't really show much. Next, as part of Beryl's plan to connect more with Mui, he suggests going to the theater together to watch a play. He asks Mui if she'd like to join him, and she agrees. The two of them watch the performance and afterward, they actually talk about it, which is a good first step toward bonding. The following morning, Mui heads out for her first day of school, and Beryl goes with her to show his support. She tells him it's not necessary, but Beryl insists that as her guardian, he has to at least visit the school once, though it's not like he's personally interested in the Magic Institute or anything. They soon reach the entrance of the institute, and the place is much larger than Beryl imagined, so it might take a while for them to figure out where they're going. At that moment, a woman approaches them and asks if they're the new transfer student and her guardian. Beryl confirms they are, so the woman introduces herself as Kainra, explaining that she's one of the teachers at the Magic Institute. She volunteers to show them around, and Beryl thanks her for the assistance because he was already lost on how to get around this place. While walking through the corridors, Kainra asks Beryl who referred him and Mui to the Magic Institute, and Beryl tells her it was Lucy. Kainra is taken aback when she hears that the head of the Magic Institute herself invited them. But with a recommendation like that, Mui won't have to take the aptitude test and can be enrolled right away. Kainra then asks if Mui has already chosen her magic specialty, but neither Mui nor Beryl has ever heard of such a thing. So Kainra explains that magic has multiple systems, and most magicians have areas they're good or bad at, so Mui will need to pick one to specialize in. Mui replies that the only thing she can manage is creating flames, so Kainra suggests that offensive magic might suit her best, though Beryl still isn't fully clear on that. Kainra further explains that magic falls into 5 categories: offensive, defensive, healing, enhancement, and lifestyle magic. Since producing flames is categorized as offensive magic, that's why Kainra recommended it to Mui. Now that Mui's major is settled, Kainra asks if she'd prefer staying in the school's dormitories or not. Neither Beryl nor Mui even knew dorms existed, so Kainra offers to show them around, and they accept her offer. Kainra guides Beryl and Mui around the girls' dorms, and the place is huge. There's a cafeteria offering 3 meals a day, baths, and fully furnished individual rooms for each student. Mui looks like she really likes the dorms, and even Beryl thinks the place is quite impressive. But he's worried that Mui might have trouble fitting in with the other kids here. She still acts distant and dismissive whenever he tries talking to her, so he feels it might be better if she continues living at home for a bit longer. However, it suddenly hits him that maybe she's just acting this way because he's an older guy, and she might have an easier time connecting with people closer to her own age. As they're walking back, they pass a sausage joint that's running some kind of special today, so Beryl asks if Mui would be okay stopping there for lunch. Mui doesn't object, but when they step inside, the place is crowded with sausage enthusiasts, leaving no room for them to sit. Just as Beryl considers leaving, someone calls out to him, and when he looks around, he sees Shurna waving him over. She tells Beryl he can sit at her table if he wants, and he decides to take her up on the invitation. They join Shurna at her table, and while they're here, Beryl takes the chance to thank her again for the new sword, since it really helped him out recently. Shurna says it wasn't a big deal, but she's curious about the girl accompanying him, so she asks who she is. Beryl says it's kind of complicated, but to sum it up, Mui is his daughter now and living at his place. Shurna nearly spits out her drink after hearing this, but once she recovers, she quickly apologizes for reacting like that. Right then, their food arrives, and while eating, Beryl asks Shurna what she's been busy with lately. She explains that there have been many monster hunts near the capital these days, mainly because a delegation from Svenity is coming to visit soon. Beryl didn't know any of this was going on, but apparently there's an annual meeting between allied nations, and the guild is required to clear out all nearby monsters to keep the delegation safe. After they finish their meal and step back outside, Beryl tells Mui she can go on ahead without him since he needs to swing by the knight's order. But before taking off, he mentions to Shorna that Mui just enrolled in the Magic Institute and asks her to throw a few words of support her way. Shorna is caught off guard to hear that Mui's got magical ability, and she leans in close, telling her she better bust her butt because the other kids at the institute aren't playing around. And now that Beryl's her guardian, she better not let herself get outclassed. Mui casually replies that she's already aware of how strong Beryl is for an old man. But hearing Mui call Beryl an old man irritates Shorna. She's about to blow up, but Beryl steps in just in time to settle her down before she says something wild. Shorna apologizes for snapping, but she wants Mui to fully appreciate how amazing Beryl truly is, and Mui quietly admits that she already knows how awesome he can be. Afterwards, Mui says her goodbyes and starts heading home, leaving Beryl a bit surprised because it looked like Mui warmed up to Shorna slightly during their chat. Shorna tells Beryl she thinks Mui has real potential. She's still a bit unpolished, but she's straightforward, so she's definitely got a bright future ahead. Beryl is glad to hear this, but for Mui to properly develop, she needs the ideal environment, and he's still uncertain whether it'd be best for her to stay at his home or move into the dorms. Out at the training yard, Beryl chats with Alusha about Mui and asks whether it might be better for her to stay in the school dorms or keep living with him. Alusha nearly loses it when she hears that Mui has been staying at Beryl's place, mostly because no one told her, but that's beside the point right now. Kirani then approaches and tells Beryl that the dorms are great because there's no travel involved, plus she'll get free food every day. Beryl already knows all the advantages of the dorms, but he's still concerned that Mui might struggle adjusting to living with others. Henblitz then joins the conversation and tells him that the only way she'll get used to new people is by being around them. Alusha also chimes in and insists that Mui should move to the dorms, but not because she really thought it through. She just doesn't like the idea of Mui continuing to stay at Beryl's house. That evening, Beryl goes to Lucy's office to hear her thoughts about the matter. And logically, Lucy agrees that the dorms make sense, though she's sure Beryl has his reasons for worrying this much. At that moment, Faisal enters because she has a report for Lucy. And since she's here, Lucy decides to ask Faisal for her opinion about the dorms too. Faisal says there's absolutely no reason not to stay in the dorms due to the convenience. But she's curious about why Lucy and Beryl are discussing this now. Lucy reminds Faisal about Mui, the girl who'll be joining the Magic Institute soon, and Faisal recalls her since she might be her instructor at some point. Beryl is confused and asks what she means, so Lucy explains that the institute currently lacks teachers, so Faisal was appointed as an instructor thanks to her outstanding talent. Faisal is very pleased with herself, and Beryl feels proud of how impressive she is, but he still needs to resolve his issue with Mui. Beryl suddenly stands up and leaves because he has plenty to think over. He's been trying his best to give Mui a good life as her guardian, and he was glad when Mui decided to stay with him. But he also noticed how thrilled Mui seemed when she saw the dorms, so he understands what the right choice is. Not long after, Beryl returns home with a bag of groceries, and the moment he sets the bag down, Mui asks if he can help her out with something. She's been hearing a weird noise coming from the dresser for some time now, and she can't figure out what it is. Beryl decides to check it out, so he gets down to listen closely, and there's definitely a sound coming from there. He lifts up the dresser and moves it aside to see what's making the noise, and surprisingly, he discovers a hole in the wall. A few moments later, some rats dash out, and Mui isn't particularly fazed since she's been living with rats her whole life. But Beryl, in contrast, immediately goes into combat mode, determined to wipe the rats out completely. He successfully drives one outside, but the other two get clever and run underneath the table, making it impossible for Beryl to smack them with the broom. Beryl quickly improvises, pulling his shirt off to try to trap the rats, but they skillfully evade all his attempts. Eventually, Beryl loses patience and flips over the whole table, crushing one of the rats underneath, leaving only one more to deal with. He chases it into the bathroom, where it circles around the bathtub, forcing Beryl to try grabbing it bare-handed. Beryl would easily catch the rat if it was human, But he can't predict a rat's movements, so he keeps grabbing randomly. Yet, the rat continuously avoids him and even climbs over Beryl's arm to dodge his hands. But right as it's about to escape, Mui suddenly cuts off its route by creating a small flame. This startles the rat enough to leap back, and that brief hesitation is all Beryl needs to snatch it mid-air. Now the last rat has been successfully caught, and Beryl is amazed that Mui helped him out even though she isn't bothered by rats. Afterward, Beryl borrows some rat repellent from a neighbor to keep them from returning, then heads back to the kitchen to begin cooking dinner. He starts noticing that maybe Mui isn't as distant as he first assumed. She reached out to him for assistance when she heard the noise, and she even pitched in to help catch the rat, even though she previously said it didn't matter. If she can cooperate like this, perhaps he doesn't have to worry about her adapting to dorm life. At that moment, Mui steps into the kitchen, and Beryl informs her dinner won't be ready for a little while longer. But then Mui unexpectedly volunteers to assist Beryl with making the meal, which makes him glad because it means she's starting to feel comfortable around him. A short time later, Mui and Beryl sit down for dinner, and Beryl thanks her for the assistance. She tells him it's no big deal, but she's planning on getting better at cooking so she can start preparing dinner herself soon. Beryl feels a little puzzled because the dorm would provide all her meals, but Mui tells him she doesn't want to move into the dorms. She prefers to stay here with Beryl and travel to the school from home. Beryl attempts to convince her that the dorm would be more convenient, but Mui has already made up her mind. Beryl constantly spoils her with kindness, and she wants to repay him somehow, so she intends to help him whenever she can. Beryl feels genuinely moved to discover how much Mui appreciates him, so he agrees to allow her to keep living with him, if that's truly her wish. Several days later, after another long day on the training grounds, Alusha makes her way over to Beryl with a look that says she's not here for small talk. Without beating around the bush, she tells him his outfit just isn't going to cut it anymore. A high-ranking delegation from the Kingdom of Sphenity is scheduled to arrive soon, and the knights have been officially appointed to oversee the safety of the visiting envoys during the diplomatic talks. Beryl figures that probably means people from the Church of Sphenity will show up, and he's concerned he might encounter more troublemakers like Rivios. But Hendlitz reassures him that these diplomatic visits usually involve high-level government figures and the royal families from both kingdoms. And given the situation, Alusha has decided that Beryl should be formally introduced to both royal families. Kearney and Hendlitz immediately agree, saying it would be a great opportunity for Beryl to build a reputation in multiple countries. But Beryl himself thinks being introduced to royalty is way out of his league. But Alusha points out that Beryl was officially appointed as a special instructor with approval directly from the royal family, so an introduction was bound to happen eventually. And if he's going to be introduced to royalty, his current clothes definitely won't make the right impression. Hendlitz chimes in, mentioning that the knights typically wear either their armor or ceremonial uniforms, but since Beryl isn't officially a knight, he'll need to pick out something appropriate for such a formal occasion. Beryl gets what they're trying to say and agrees that he'll buy some suitable clothing whenever he finds the chance. But Alusha absolutely refuses to let him shop alone. One of the main reasons she even suggested this idea is because she's been wanting to go on a date with Beryl for quite some time. So she quickly invents an excuse about how Beryl probably doesn't know much about the clothing shops around the capital, so it's essential she accompanies him. Beryl has no objections to her joining, and Alusha is thrilled that she'll finally get to spend quality time with him. She tells him to meet her tomorrow afternoon, but for now, she's got some official duties to take care of. As Alusha heads out, Kearney quietly asks Hendlitz if he noticed just how insistent Alusha was about going clothes shopping with Beryl. Hendlitz assumes she simply cares deeply about Beryl's appearance since he's her mentor, but Kearney's not buying that, and she's pretty sure there's something a lot deeper going on here. Later in the day, Beryl gets home, and Mui tells him that a package arrived earlier. Beryl checks the note attached, which turns out to be a message of gratitude from Ibroy. Ibroy wanted to thank Beryl for all the help he provided, so he decided to send a large collection of outfits specifically for Mui. Mui isn't convinced these frilly clothes suit her, but Beryl insists there must be some nice dresses among them, so she can pick her favorites later. Right now it's dinner time, so they both sit at the table and start eating. During their meal, Beryl explains to Mui that he'll soon be guarding some very important people at work, and he needs suitable clothing for the occasion, so he's going shopping tomorrow afternoon with Alusha. Mui recalls Alusha as the silver-haired girl she previously met, So when Beryl casually asks if she wants to tag along, Mui declines. It's obvious to her that Alusha intends this as a date, and she has no desire to intrude. The next morning, Beryl meets up with Alusha as they agreed, but this is the first time he's ever seen Alusha in casual clothing, and he's slightly taken aback by how attractive she looks. Alusha thanks him for noticing, happy that Beryl complimented her outfit, but she reminds him that they should get moving. As they head out, Kiruni and Henblitz secretly emerge from their hiding place around the corner. Kiruni already knows exactly which shop Alusha intends to take Beryl to, so she's carefully planned a route that lets her and Henblitz spy on them undetected. Henblitz scolds her for shamelessly intruding on Beryl and Alusha's privacy like this, but she reminds him that he's equally guilty for tagging along. Alusha then takes Beryl to a clothing shop she particularly likes, though he feels slightly awkward since he clearly doesn't match the sophisticated atmosphere. When Alusha steps inside, the manager immediately welcomes her by name, asking if he can help her with anything. Alusha responds that she'd just like to browse for a while, and the manager tells her that's perfectly fine, and he's available to help whenever she's ready. Beryl finds the manager very accommodating, but with so many clothes around, he has no idea where to even start. Additionally, he has no confidence in his own fashion choices, so he decides to rely on Alusha instead. However, when Alusha finally selects something, Beryl realizes with shock that her fashion sense is even worse than his. The manager then walks up and praises Alusha for her outstanding pick, but Beryl immediately knows he's only flattering her to secure the sale. If he shows up at the delegation dressed like that, he'll never hear the end of it, so he gently suggests they'd better keep browsing before making any purchases. Beryl has now fully accepted that leaving the decisions to Alusha will leave him looking damn ridiculous, so he needs to step up himself. He scans around the shop and notices a suit in the corner that seems ideal for him. Alusha complains that it's not ornate enough for her taste, but something simple and neat is exactly what Beryl is after. Not to mention, it looks pretty comfortable. Alusha remains unconvinced by Beryl's pick, but ultimately it's his call, so if that's what he wants, she'll respect it. She tells the manager to reserve that outfit for now, since they'd prefer to visit a couple more shops before settling on anything final. Honestly, Beryl as a man would have gladly just purchased the suit he chose already, but since Alusha is taking the time to help him out, he doesn't want to disregard her opinion completely. After leaving the shop, Alusha suggests stopping by a cafe for lunch before resuming their shopping. At the same time, Kiruni and Henblitz are still spying from afar, and by this point, Kiruni is extremely invested in Alusha's romantic adventure. Alusha soon brings Beryl to her favorite place to eat in the neighborhood, and although it's somewhat fancier than what Beryl is used to, he doesn't mind experiencing something new. Soon their meal is served, and everything is falling perfectly into place for Alusha. Shopping followed by a meal in an elegant cafe definitely qualifies as a proper date, making her heart race with excitement. At the same time, Kiruni and Henblitz are at a nearby table, feeling quite amazed because they've never seen Alusha so joyful before. Kiruni figures it's because she's spending time with Beryl, but Henblitz comments that if shopping and eating is all it takes for something to count as a date, doesn't that mean he and Kiruni are technically on a date right now? Later that evening, Beryl and Alusha head back from their shopping adventure, and Beryl apologizes because despite Alusha taking him around to so many shops, he ultimately ended up buying the suit he found at the very first one. Alusha reassures him that it's no big deal as long as he's happy, and besides, today was incredibly enjoyable for her. They bid each other farewell, and as Beryl leaves, Alusha simply stands there, watching him go. Henblitz and Kiruni are still spying from around a corner, but Henblitz has several unanswered questions, so he decides to step forward and speak directly to Alusha. First, he comes clean and apologizes for basically following her around all day, but Alusha assures him she isn't bothered, since she hasn't done anything she'd regret. With that settled, Henblitz mentions he has a question for her, and after Alusha agrees, he asks her how she genuinely feels about Beryl. The following day, Kiruni approaches Henblitz at the training grounds and apologizes for yesterday, because after he stepped out from their hiding spot, she panicked and left him behind. Henblitz reassures her it's alright, and in case she's anxious, he deliberately avoided mentioning Kiruni's involvement to Alusha. However, that makes Kiruni feel even guiltier since she was the one who dragged Henblitz along to begin with. Right then, Alusha arrives, and Henblitz greets her normally, but Kiruni still feels a bit uneasy, so she slowly retreats and claims she's going to practice some sword techniques. Hendlitz remembers what happened yesterday. After he asked Alusha what she really thinks of Beryl, she simply said she just wants to make him happy. And Hendlitz has been contemplating ever since about what she meant exactly. Suddenly, Alusha interrupts his thoughts and apologizes, mentioning she intends to take control of the training hall for a bit. Hendlitz asks for the reason, so she explains that when Beryl gets here, she's going to challenge him to a sparring match. Hendlitz is stunned to hear this, but Alusha rationalizes the decision by explaining that witnessing Beryl directly face the Knight Commander would greatly strengthen everyone's confidence in him. Hendlitz understands, since even a defeat would serve as clear evidence that Beryl is fully capable as their instructor. But Hendlitz can't help but wonder aloud if that's truly the only motivation she has for wanting to duel him. Alusha admits that should she emerge victorious, she's planning to reveal one of her personal wishes to Beryl. But that's as much as she'll reveal, so she politely excuses herself to go prepare. Once Alusha departs, Kirani returns to Hendlitz, curious about what he and Alusha discussed. Hendlitz fills her in on Alusha's plans, explaining that she intends to challenge Beryl as soon as he arrives, and if she wins, she'll confess one of her personal desires to him. Kirani starts panicking because that's got to mean Alusha plans to confess her feelings to Beryl. And thinking about it now, it totally makes sense considering how happy she looked yesterday. Both agree Alusha is incredibly attractive and has a charming personality, so any man would be thrilled by her confession. But there's really no telling how things will unfold. A short while later, Beryl shows up, and the moment he enters the hall, Alusha immediately approaches him. Beryl is caught off guard seeing her here, since she's usually occupied with other duties around this time. So he asks if she's come for some additional training. Alusha says that's exactly right, telling Beryl she'd like to spar with him, though that's definitely not what he thought she'd say. Alusha mentions wanting some practical combat experience before the delegation arrives, and since she phrased it that way, Beryl finds no reason to turn her down, so he accepts the match. Both grab some training swords and take their positions. Though considering Alusha is the Knight Commander, Beryl seriously doubts his chances here. But since it's just practice for Alusha's sake, he's perfectly fine with being at a disadvantage. Just before they start, Alusha warns Beryl that people nicknamed her Lightning due to how swift she strikes, so he'd better stay alert. And the moment the match starts, she instantly shows off her incredible speed. Beryl manages to deflect her first strike, which is extremely remarkable since most opponents can't even follow her movements. But he's still nervous since he's never faced someone as fast as Alusha before. Alusha quickly continues with several swift slashes, but Beryl skillfully deflects every single attack and maintains his stance. He gradually realizes several things, like how Alusha must have trained relentlessly in addition to her commander responsibilities, and how her usual openings before striking have vanished entirely. Beryl knows he can't keep deflecting forever, so he switches to attacking, but Alusha effortlessly matches him and steadily forces him back. He needs to pay careful attention to every subtle motion Alusha makes if he wants to spot an opening. And when she charges again, Beryl finally notices a minor weakness in Alusha's stance, allowing him to predict her next move and successfully deflect it. Even so, her incredible speed still makes it challenging to keep up. Plus, Alusha's precision is so sharp that he's unable to land even one clean strike on her. Beryl now knows for certain he can't win against Alusha if he fights cleanly, but there's nothing stopping him from fighting dirty. After Alusha lunges towards him again, she notices a vulnerability on Beryl's flank, so she adjusts her stance to strike it. But before she can land her blow, Beryl swiftly seizes her jacket and flings her down. That counts as a victory for Beryl, though Kirani wonders if it's really okay for him to win that way. Hendlitz reminds her that real battles have no rules anyway, and moreover, Beryl is likely the only person who could actually pull off a maneuver like that against Alusha. Alusha graciously admits defeat, and Beryl remarks that she fights way too honorably. In actual combat, your enemies will exploit any opportunity they get, fair or unfair, so you should always be ready to respond accordingly. Just then, the clock strikes, and Beryl announces he's heading to lunch. After he's left, Hendlitz and Kirani walk up to Alusha. Kirani thought the fight was incredible, but she still wants to confirm if Alusha was genuinely planning to reveal her feelings to Beryl had she won. Alusha acts surprised and tells Kirani she only intended to ask Beryl to accompany her shopping again. Kirani feels ridiculous now for assuming Alusha had romantic feelings towards Beryl, so she sheepishly walks away. But once Kirani is gone, Hendlitz poses the exact same question. and Alusha finally confesses that she truly wanted to tell Beryl about her feelings. She cares deeply about Beryl's happiness and would love to be the one responsible for it. But if things don't go as she hopes, she's willing to accept him finding happiness with someone else. Later that evening, Beryl is at home telling Mui about his spar with Alusha and how he barely managed to hold his own. He admits it was incredibly satisfying seeing his student push herself so hard against him. But the way he describes it, Mui suspects it wasn't simply another training session to her. Mui tries to point out that Alusha clearly has feelings for him, but Beryl quickly interrupts her mid-sentence. He already knows what she's about to say, but he doesn't want to hear it since Alusha is his student. And besides, the age difference between them is enormous, so whatever Mui's thinking, it's better if it's left unsaid. The next morning, Mui shows up late after attending her school direction, and by then, Beryl's already finished making dinner and is chilling with a cold beer in hand. Mui glances at him and asks if he seriously likes beer that greatly. Beryl grins and says there's nothing better to help him unwind after a long, exhausting day than kicking back with a drink from his favorite cup. Mui mentions that Beryl's mug has a chip in it, but he insists it's no issue since he can still drink from it. More significantly, he spots the bag Mui brought home with her, so he asks what it contains, prompting her to open it and show off what she received. The Institute issued her a new uniform and some introductory textbooks on magic. Although the books are loaned, meaning she'll eventually need to give them back and must take care not to damage them. Beryl feels proud since Mui will officially start attending the Magic Institute in just a few days. She already has her uniform and textbooks ready. But then Beryl remembers his previous visit to the Institute and notices that all the students carried school bags. He asks Mui if the school said anything about providing her with a school bag, but since she didn't receive one, she guesses it wasn't included in the starter kit. She reassures Beryl that he shouldn't stress about it, as she can easily just use her sack, but Beryl refuses to settle for that. He insists that Mui absolutely needs an appropriate school bag before her classes start. And though she personally doesn't care much about what kind of bag she uses, she values Beryl's kindness. The following morning, Shurna is summoned to the guild master's office as he has a task for her. Shurna reads through the report, and Majin clarifies that a team of platinum-ranked adventurers discovered the monster and have managed to trap it within a forest close to the capital. But the guild hasn't executed any decisive actions yet since they're uncertain whether they possess sufficient strength to subdue it. The guildmaster inquires if Shurna would be willing to join the effort. But Shurna explains that her abilities alone likely won't significantly alter the outcome against a threat of this scale. At that moment, someone knocks on the door and informs Shurna that someone has arrived asking for her. Somewhere else in town, Beryl has just stumbled across an excellent bag store, so he heads inside, only to quickly realize he doesn't have the faintest clue what the hell type of bag Mui might want. The shopkeeper notices Beryl's uncertainty and approaches him, asking if he can be of any assistance. Beryl explains he needs a bag for school, and the shopkeeper immediately guesses that if Beryl is hunting for a school bag at this point in the year, his kid must be transferring into the Magic Institute. Beryl confirms he's correct, so the shopkeeper leads him to a set of bags that Magic Institute students frequently purchase. This is precisely what Beryl was searching for, so he picks out a bag and states that he'd like to purchase it. But then the shopkeeper then informs him that the bag costs 95,000 dalk, and Beryl is so stunned that he momentarily loses the ability to speak. The shopkeeper isn't trying to rip Beryl off or anything. It's just that this particular bag is crafted from imported Salaro leather, making it exceptionally high quality. He even suggests some cheaper alternatives if the Salaro bag is beyond his budget. But honestly, the budget bags look exactly like what you'd expect, so damn bad. Beryl eventually exits the store empty-handed, unable to make up his mind. All the decent bags are extremely pricey, and even though Beryl could technically afford it at the moment, given his current salary from the Knight's Order, there's no assurance that things will stay this stable forever. He intends to preserve as much money as he can for Mui's future, so he can't justify dipping into his savings just for a bag. Nevertheless, he still desires a nice bag for Mui's schooling, so he must come up with a way to earn some extra cash. As he's heading home, Beryl unexpectedly encounters Shurna, who looks like she's troubled by something significant, prompting him to ask her what's wrong. Shurna shares that she's recently been requested to handle a rather challenging mission, and she's unsure how to tackle it. She apologizes in advance for being self-centered, But since Beryl is here, she was hoping he might be willing to do her a favor. She asks if he'd accompany her on this mission, as it would greatly ease her mind. But Beryl initially doubts it's wise, since he can't envision himself being of much help in a mission that even Shurna finds concerning. But the second Shurna mentions there's a paycheck involved, Beryl suddenly has a change of heart and agrees to tag along. Later the following day, Beryl and Shurna are riding a carriage toward the mission location. And just to verify that he has everything correctly, Beryl asks Shurna again if their only objective is to capture a specific horse alive. Shurna confirms he's correct and continues to explain that the remarkable horse is intended as a present for the Sveen royal family when they arrive for the upcoming delegation. Beryl inquires if this means someone connected to the Liberion royal family contracted her, and Shurna verifies that's indeed the case, which is precisely why she couldn't simply refuse the job and felt compelled to seek Beryl's assistance. They eventually reach the destination and rendezvous with the adventurers who originally spotted the horse, prompting Shurna to request an update from them. The man informs her that they've set up a secure perimeter, so they're confident the horse hasn't left the forest. Yet it still hasn't triggered any of the traps they've placed, meaning they currently have no idea where it might be. Shurna acknowledges the circumstances and instructs the adventurers to concentrate on keeping the perimeter secure, while she and Beryl venture into the woods to find the horse. They gather their gear before entering the forest to start the search, and as they proceed, Shurna provides Beryl with more details about their target. According to what they've heard, the horse has entirely white fur and a silver-colored mane, which makes it exceptionally uncommon and valuable. Beryl had previously hunted plenty of monsters during the days when he needed to guard his farmland. But this is the very first occasion he's been tasked with capturing one alive, and it surely won't be simple, as this horse already managed to elude a group of exceptionally skilled platinum-level adventurers. Eventually, they discover a set of hoofprints left behind in the mud beside a small watering spot, indicating that the horse recently visited the area. Though given its apparent intelligence, Beryl doubts it'll return to a spot where its tracks are easily noticeable. That means the horse will likely appear at the watering area on the opposite side of the forest the next time it needs to drink, so they decide to set up an ambush there instead. As they begin heading towards the other watering spot, Shurna suddenly asks Beryl if his home situation with Mui is going smoothly. Beryl is surprised by the sudden question, but replies that his bond with Mui has significantly improved compared to the past. At least, that's how it seems to him, although he often finds it difficult to gauge what Mui is actually thinking. Shurna finds it unexpected that Beryl is struggling so much, given his extensive experience with children at his dojo, but teaching a child to fight and acting as a father figure are completely separate roles. They ultimately reach the watering spot, and Shurna explains to Beryl that when the horse appears, she'll move to its rear while Beryl needs to position himself in front to cut off its escape route. Following this, she plans to fire an arrow at it, reasoning that horses panic when attacked from behind and should dash forward, straight towards Beryl, who will then capture it with a net. The strategy sounds solid, but given that the horse is intended as a gift, Beryl is concerned that an arrow could possibly leave a visible wound. But Shurna anticipated this issue and prepared arrows specifically padded with fabric at the tips, eliminating the risk of harming the horse. With the details settled, it's now time for them to separate and lie in wait for the horse, and they both assume their positions. Soon enough, the horse arrives to drink water, and upon finally seeing it up close, Beryl is captivated by its beauty. Shurna begins silently creeping around to take her position at the horse's rear, so Beryl mirrors her actions, quietly moving into place at the front. Once they're both set, Shurna shoots an arrow at the horse's hindquarters, and exactly as anticipated, it bolts forward towards Beryl. But just as Beryl is about to snag it with the net, the horse effortlessly leaps over him and continues sprinting away. Shurna instructs Beryl to pursue it, and Beryl must secretly be some kind of Olympic runner, because he manages to somehow overtake the galloping horse and once again positions himself ahead of it, net in hand. Yet when he throws the net, the horse skillfully avoids it, leaving Beryl with no choice but to leap onto its back and attempt to halt it by force. Regrettably, he has zero horse riding experience, and he swiftly tumbles to the ground. The horse then stands perfectly still, seemingly mocking Beryl's failure. But as Shurna attempts to catch it using a lasso, the horse dodges her rope and flees again. Beryl and Shurna resume their pursuit until eventually cornering the horse against a ridge. Shurna tells Beryl she'll run forward to scare the horse towards him so he can capture it. But despite the fact that Shurna successfully frightens the horse, that damn thing makes a wild jump onto a nearby rocky spire. The horse appears very pleased with itself for evading them once more. But after a second, the spire starts to collapse. Beryl of course couldn't simply watch the horse plunge to its death, so he leaps down after it, and they both crash onto the bottom of the ravine. The horse immediately panics since it has no intention of being captured. But Beryl instructs it to settle down, explaining that he can't even attempt capturing it while they're trapped down here. It's impossible for Beryl to scale that rock face, and the horse clearly isn't capable either, leaving them with the sole option of crossing to the opposite bank of the river. For a second, Beryl thinks about swimming across, but after one glance at that freezing, fast-moving water, he drops that damn idea fast. So instead he unsheathes his blade and swiftly fells the nearby tree with a single strike. Now they can safely cross, and the horse seems to recognize that Beryl intends to help, willingly accompanying him without resistance. As they traverse their improvised bridge, Beryl slips and almost plunges into the river, but the horse grabs him at the last second. Beryl is relieved that the horse rescued him, and it appears they're now on friendly terms, so by the time Shurna arrives, capturing it is no longer necessary. Together, they escort the horse back into town, and the guildmaster expresses immense gratitude to Beryl, because requests like these can greatly influence the fate of the guild. As agreed, Beryl receives a generous payment as compensation, and now that everything is settled, they each depart on their own paths. Using the money from his reward, Beryl managed to purchase the bag for Mui, but upon returning home he couldn't locate her, so he figures she must have gone out to buy some things. Shortly afterwards, Mui comes back and is astonished when she notices that Beryl actually bought her a bag. She'd clearly stated that she didn't really need a bag, but owning a nice bag herself is seriously awesome. Mui expresses gratitude for the present, revealing to Beryl that she has a surprise for him too. She shows him that she picked up a new ceramic cup as a replacement for the chipped one, but quickly clarifies that she definitely didn't steal it. She got a job through Shurna's help and worked super hard to make enough money for it. And when he heard this, Beryl realized why Shurna spent so much time chatting about Mui earlier today. Mui then encourages Beryl to give the new mug a shot, and surprisingly, the beer tastes remarkably different than it did when he used the wooden mug. Mui recalls hearing somewhere that beer's flavor improves significantly when consumed from a ceramic mug, and knowing how much Beryl loves beer, she thought it'd be great if he could savor it even more. That's why she washed dishes for several days to earn the money, and Beryl is so touched by Mui's kindness that it brings tears to his eyes. The following morning marks Mui's very first day at school, and after she finishes getting ready, she steps outside alongside Beryl. Mui insists that Beryl didn't have to accompany her, but since it's her first ever school day, he simply wanted to send her off properly. Soon, the school carriage arrives, Mui climbs aboard, and Beryl wishes her a pleasant day. Beryl then proceeds to work at the training hall, where Kiruni immediately notices he seems more cheerful than usual today, prompting her to inquire if something nice occurred. Right at that moment, Alicia arrives, mentioning she has something she'd like to ask Beryl. She explains that Sohin's Knight Commander and Vice Commander have just arrived, and she and Hendlitz are about to meet with them. She was hoping Beryl would participate in the meeting as well. Beryl doesn't particularly have any reason to be present at the meeting, but given everything that's transpired involving Sohin so far, he feels it's wise to monitor them closely, so he accepts the invitation. However, upon entering the meeting room, he is startled to discover that the Sohin Knight Commander is Rose, his former student. That concludes this episode. Thank you for watching. If you want to see the next part, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell.